Hey guys, tonight we're doing something different, darker, quieter and a little uncomfortable. We're heading deep into the heart of the Byzantine Empire, but not for the glittering cathedrals or the echoes of emperors in marble halls. No, you're stepping off the main road, past the incense and icons, into a part of Constantinople where even the street lamps seem to blink twice before staying lit. Before we dive in though, you should know, you probably won't survive this. Not physically, so, of course, you'll make it out. But mentally, yeah, good luck keeping your rose-tinted view of ancient empires intact. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, tell me your city and what time it is where you are. I want to know who else is up at this hour thinking about the dark corners of history. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing in the middle of Constantinople, glorious, arrogant Constantinople. The Hagia Sophia looms like a spaceship dropped from heaven, all domes and whispered chanting. The marble beneath your feet is smooth and foreign, veined like old hands. Vendors bark from carts stacked with dates, almonds, and sweet-smelling pastries stuffed with goat cheese and honey. You catch flashes of purple, imperial robes, the smell of the Bosphorus. Salty and tangled with fish and wet stone rides in on the breeze. You're overwhelmed, sure, but curious, because no one's looking you in the eye here. They pass you, cloaked and hurried. There's something they're avoiding or hiding. You slip down an alley that splits off from the Mise, the city's grand main avenue. The bricks sweat moisture. A stray cat hisses and disappears into a hole in the wall. The hum of the crowd fades behind you, replaced by low laughter, drunken muttering, and the occasional sharp yell, more bark than language. That's when you smell it. Not the sweet wine or roasting meat from the city square. This is muskier, heavier, a mix of perfume, sweat, incense, and something like regret. You've reached one of Constantinople's quieter truths. There's no sign, just a painted wooden door beneath a faded fresco of Dionysus, god of revelry and chaos. Ironic. You knock once and it creaks open on its own. Inside it's warm. Not the warm of hearth and home, more like the warm of too many bodies pressed too close in a room meant for half as many. Candles sputter in wall niches, and everything is bathed in amber and shadow. You're in what they call a pandikeon, officially an inn, unofficially a brothel with just enough legal veneer to keep the church grumbling but powerless. You pass through a curtain of beads that tinkle like wind chimes in a nightmare. The man who greets you is old, robed, and entirely unimpressed. He gestures vaguely, and a young girl, too young, leads you past more curtains, more doors. On the walls, crude frescoes try to mimic Roman sensuality, but the paint is flaking, the colours muted. Nothing is as glamorous as it pretends to be. You're offered wine, but the cup smells like it's been washed in bath water. You decline. You sit. You watch. The women here don't float like they do in ancient love poems. They limp. They carry trays. One leans heavily against a wall and adjusts a bandage on her ankle. A few smile at you, not the kind of smile that invites. The kind that checks if you're safe, if you're not drunk, if you'll pay, if you'll leave. One of them sits across from you without asking. Her name, she says, is Ligeia. Whether that's her real name or one borrowed from a Homeric tragedy is anyone's guess. She has one eye slightly more closed than the other, a permanent squint. She's chewing on something that isn't there. "You're new," she says. You nod. "You don't look like you're here for what they're here for." You look around. She's right. Most of the men around you are already vanishing behind curtains or slumped in wine-soaked torpor. One man laughs loudly, then begins to cry just as quickly. "You looking for a story?" she asks. "Or for guilt you can afford?" You tell her you're just curious. She laughs, and it's not unkind, but it's tired. "Well, curiosity has killed far more women than it ever did cats in this place." You're surprised at how direct she is, but she explains quickly. "The rules in a place like this: speak fast, speak real. Trust takes too long, and most don't come back." And as you listen, you start to understand the math here. Brothels in the Byzantine Empire aren't exactly hidden. They're tolerated, taxed even. There are even special sections of the city where they're allowed to operate, segregated by law and zoning, shoved into the margins so the empire can keep its holy image polished. Prostitution isn't illegal, but it's damned. which means the Empire wants the coin, not the shame, so they build a maze where these women can work without being seen, and if they are seen, well, that's their sin to carry. The official term is pornean, and the women are porneae. Sound familiar? It should. But don't mistake the historical term for what we now associate with digital gloss. This isn't staged or sanitized. This is transactional survival. Ligeia taps her fingers on the table as she talks. You notice the bruises, small, dark, and scattered like constellations. She doesn't hide them. One senator, she says, comes every week, pays double to pretend I'm his dead wife. Another one likes to watch me read prayers while she waves her hand vaguely. The church, they bless the street outside and then look the other way. Maybe they think if they don't look, God won't either. And here's the first historical oddity. While brothels were condemned in sermons and by the law codes of emperors like Justinian I, they were still tightly regulated. In fact, they were taxed, and those taxes went straight into public funds. Infrastructure built with the profits of exploitation. Holy roads paved by unholy earnings. Meanwhile, fringe whispers float around that brothels sometimes doubled as initiation sites for secret cults, or that some girls claimed visions, saints appearing in dreams, offering escape or forgiveness. Ligeia just shrugs. People believe what they need to, even me. You sit in the flickering dark, realizing you've just cracked the surface. There's more, a lot more, and none of it's going to feel clean. You wake the next morning, if it's even morning, because in this city, the light bends strange through the dome-filled skyline. Time here doesn't tick, it coils. The streets of Constantinople are awake before you are, stirring with sandals on stone, goats bleating, market stalls creaking open. The sky is a flat pewter colour, soft and uncaring, like it knows what you saw last night but isn't planning to talk about it. You step out of the Pandikeon, still blinking off the haze of wine you didn't drink and smoke you didn't light. The door closes behind you without a sound, like the city's trying to convince you it was all a fever dream. But your tunic smells like musk and incense and something sour you can't quite name. You follow the slope of the alley downhill toward the lower districts near the seawalls, pulled by the instinct and a need to keep walking. That's what this city does. It draws you forward with one hand while pickpocketing your illusions with the other. This morning you start noticing things, subtle things. A woman sweeping her threshold pauses to eye you. A shopkeeper lowers his voice as a soldier passes. Children avoid certain corners. You're not sure what you're seeing yet, but you're seeing it. You pass a side chapel, just a narrow thing, practically a hallway with a cross. Inside, a priest mutters prayers with the kind of fervour that comes from knowing he's outnumbered. The icons stare at you with wide Byzantine eyes, heavy-lidded and gold-leafed, their gaze both passive and accusing. And below one, someone scratched something into the plaster with a blade. It's in Greek, and it says, "Not all women are whores, but all whores were once women." You don't know if it's a lament or a warning. A boy leads you farther downhill. He doesn't say who sent him, but his feet are quick and his clothes too clean for this district. You follow because that's what you do now. He winds through gender-twisting streets until you reach a place where the city's surface starts to peel. Fewer churches, more taverns, less marble, more wood stained dark by weather and use. This is the Makros Emblos, the long commercial avenue that used to hum with imperial processions. Now it crackles with trade and not all of it legal. There's a corner where the perfume sellers seem to only have one customer at a time. A shadowed door with a wine jug hung sideways is apparently code for a different kind of refreshment. You're starting to read the street now like a second language. You duck beneath an awning where dried herbs hang low, brushing your forehead. Inside, a woman who introduces herself as Callista offers you a bowl of something hot and cloudy. You sip before asking. It tastes like bitter olives and pepper, but it wakes you up. She eyes you like she's seen your type before. "You went to one of the Pandikeia," she says flatly. You nod. "Did you pay or just watch?" You tell her the truth. She snorts. "That's worse," she says, wiping her hands on her apron. "At least the others admit what they want." Callista isn't a madam. She isn't a prostitute. She's a fixer. A woman who grew up in the underbelly of the city and now makes her coin managing the people who orbit the trade. Herbalists, midwives, lookouts, even the guards who take their bribes in coin or skin. She lays it out for you, low and slow, while chopping garlic like it personally wronged her. "There's two worlds here," she says. "The empire above, with its purple robes and gold leaf saints, and the one underneath, paved in broken promises and coined with blood on it. The trick is, both worlds need each other, always have. You ask her if brothels have always been this common in the Empire. She laughs, and it's not a happy sound. Common? They were mapped. During the reign of Theophilus, there were districts where every fifth building was a house of flesh. The government didn't just tolerate them, they counted them, taxed them, regulated them. We weren't hiding. We were on the books. That's your historical fact of the day. Prostitution in Byzantium wasn't just acknowledged, it was an institutional part of the urban economy. The government licensed brothels, even posted inspectors to make sure standards were upheld. A strange bureaucratic form of exploitation, wrapped in imperial red tape, but it gets weirder. Callista leans in. "Want a real fringe fact?" she says, her eyes glittering. There was a rumour once, swore it came from inside the palace, that one of the emperors had a secret list, not of spies, not of traitors, of girls, a collection of names, descriptions and prices, for visiting dignitaries, foreign envoys, a hospitality list, like a menu. You try to process that, you fail. She doesn't wait for you to catch up. Truth? Who knows? The empire's built on shadows, but when men hold power and women hold desperation, you don't need scrolls to know what's happening behind those doors. She waves you off after that, as if her information has a timer. You leave her stall and find yourself drifting toward the harbour, where the city exhales its smells of sea rot and trade wind. There, behind a stack of shipping crates, you see something that stops you cold. A woman in silk, real silk, not the cheap kind. Her veil is sheer, her eyes outlined in kohl, and she's arguing quietly with a man in uniform. You can't hear them, but the posture tells the story. She touches his arm, he jerks away. She opens her purse, he grabs it, and then he lets her go. You recognise the woman. She was in the Pandakaon, but she looked different there. Hunched, dulled, small. Here she's upright, intentional, almost like she's playing a part. Maybe this is the real her, or maybe the woman last night was. You follow her, not too close. She ducks into a different building this time, cleaner, with painted shutters. Another brothel, but a higher class. You stand across the street watching shadows move behind linen curtains, and suddenly it hits you. There's a whole hierarchy within the trade. Class, status, brothel tiers, almost like guild ranks. And here's the scholarly debate buzzing in the background like a street performer's flute. Were Byzantine prostitutes considered a part of urban society, or pushed to its margins entirely? Some argue they were integral, woven into the economy, the culture, even the religious structure by way of repentance and redemption tales. Others say they were always othered, tolerated but tainted, both necessary and disposable. You're starting to think both sides might be right. You watch until the shutters close and the street goes quiet again. Then you keep walking, wondering how many more doors you'll need to knock on before this city tells you the whole truth. You don't remember the moment you stopped being surprised. Maybe it was when you saw the senator's wife exiting a brothel with her veil down but her shoes mismatched. Or when that boy, couldn't have been older than 15, offered to show you the real houses, the ones not on maps, in exchange for 2 copper coins and your silence. At some point, the shock wore off and something heavier settled in its place, a kind of curiosity laced with dread. Like poking an old wound just to see if it still bleeds. Today, the light is too bright for the truth you're chasing. The sun glints off church domes and imperial towers, casting long shadows over the city's more reluctant corners. But you've learned by now, the brighter the surface, the darker the cracks. So you head toward the harbour again, but this time you hang left before the docks, down a tight corridor that smells like dead fish and fermented figs. It's where the inns blur into wine houses, and wine houses blur into something else entirely. The signs here don't advertise what's sold inside. They hint. A red scarf tied around a post, a cracked vase painted with dancing girls, symbols that mean nothing to strangers and everything to those who've been here before. This is where you find the next door. It's painted blue, chipped at the edges, and hanging just slightly off its hinges. A brass oil lamp swings lazily above it. You push it open. No one greets you, but someone has lit incense. Strong stuff, thick and cloying, meant to cover the sour undercurrents of unwashed bodies and overused beds. A woman, older, with skin that once held youth like a flame but now just flickers, beckons you wordlessly. She doesn't smile. She doesn't need to. You're not a customer. She knows it. You know it. You follow her up narrow stairs, worn smooth in the centre from thousands of bare feet. On the second floor, she pulls aside a curtain. Inside, laughter, perfume, silk. A world designed to distract you from the truth. But you know to look past the surface now. You let your eyes adjust. And then you see them, the women, not lounging, not flirting, working. One sews a torn hem, another checks a ledger. A third is arguing with a man whose robes scream wealth, but whose posture screams desperation. This isn't a pleasure house. It's an operation. You take a seat near the wall and keep your mouth shut, your ears open. That's when the old woman speaks, her voice husky with years and smoke. "This used to be a temple," she says, running her fingers over a faded mosaic buried beneath a layer of grime. "A shrine to Aphrodite. You know what that means?" You nod. The goddess of love, lust, fertility, and she chuckles darkly. They never change the purpose, just the owner. And that's your historical hook for today. Some Byzantine brothels were built directly over, or inside, what had once been pagan temples. It was symbolic, intentional even. As Christianity swept through the empire, old shrines were either sanctified or, in cases like this, rebranded with less holy functions. The empire wanted to erase the old gods, but lust just changed curtains. A younger girl, maybe 16, walks in with a tray of olives and bread. Her eyes meet yours for a second, and something flickers there. A question, a warning, but she says nothing and disappears again. You ask the old woman how long the girl's been here. "She came last spring," she says. "It was sold by her uncle after her parents died. He said she was too pretty to waste on farm work." You don't ask what she thinks of that. The woman doesn't need your outrage. She's seen 1,000 outraged faces come and go, all of them soft and useless. Outside the window you can hear bells ringing from a nearby church. They echo through the alleys like iron gilt. And you wonder, not for the first time, how the holy coexists with the profane so easily in this city. The juxtaposition is jarring. One minute you're under stained glass, the next you're under someone you barely know. But for Byzantines, this isn't hypocrisy, it's balance. At least that's what they tell themselves. And here's the fringe theory of the day. Whispers that some brothels kept sacred rituals alive under the noses of Christian authorities. Fertility rites, old dances, chants in forgotten tongues. You ask the woman if it's true. She narrows her eyes. "Maybe," she says. "Or maybe we just sing to feel like people again." You sit there in silence for a while, long enough to notice the stains on the rugs. The way one of the girls checks the window every few minutes like she's expecting someone, maybe hoping they don't come. Long enough to understand that none of this is designed for you. It's not a show, it's survival, dressed in rouge and repetition. The woman gestures toward the stairwell. "You should leave soon," she says. "The night clients start early, and not all of them like strangers watching." You nod, stand, thank her. She shrugs, unimpressed. "You want a story? Fine, but don't act surprised when it doesn't end clean." You descend the stairs slowly, boots brushing against the past with every step. Back on the street, the sun's still too bright. You blink against it and try to breathe through the tightness in your chest. And here's where the scholarly debate rattles through your brain. Were these women seen as social pariahs or as necessary labourers within the Byzantine economy? Some argue they were marginalised, denied burial in consecrated ground, refused communion. Others note the ways in which sex workers were treated as unofficial civil servants, kept under surveillance but still allowed a degree of autonomy most lower-class women never touched. The truth you're starting to see is slippery. Like oil on stone, the empire needed these women, and punished them for it. You walk, again, because that's all you can do when you've seen too much but not enough. Past the bathhouses, past the meat stalls, past a preacher shouting that lust will be the empire's undoing. You wonder if he knows who his audience is, or if he's just shouting to hear his own righteousness echo. Eventually, you stop near a fountain where 2 children play with a broken doll. You sit on the edge, feet aching, head full of dust and contradictions. Behind you, a brothel door slams shut, and the city exhales. There's something unsettling about the way Constantinople looks at you now. It's as if the city knows you're onto it, like you've picked up a forbidden scent. People pass you with practiced indifference, but every now and then someone lingers a little too long on your face. Not with kindness, not even with suspicion. Just that cold, silent measurement, trying to decide if you belong here, or if you're about to become another name whispered through the alleys and forgotten by dawn. You move slowly today. You're not in a hurry. There's nothing urgent calling you, only that slow magnetic pull back toward the city's shadows. You stay near the fringes of the residential quarters, where the air grows heavier with charcoal smoke, frying lard and perfume, cheap, floral and far too thick. It marks the invisible border of where homes become lodging houses, where guests stay for hours, not nights. You pass another one of these hybrid places, a wooden structure sagging under its own history. Curtains flutter through cracked windows. On the stoop, a girl paints her nails with something crimson that probably isn't paint. She watches you without blinking, her toes tapping a rhythm only she understands. You don't stop. She doesn't wave. But a little farther on, something different catches your eye. It's a structure less worn than the others, whitewashed stone, a tiled roof, and small decorative arches above shuttered windows. The entrance is guarded by two men, but they aren't soldiers or thugs. They wear plain tunics, their arms folded, expressions neutral, but precise. Professional. That's what gives it away. This isn't just another porneon, this is what they call a guild house. Yes, you've stumbled into the bureaucratic side of the Byzantine sex trade. You're let in without a word, mostly because you're clean, curious looking, and not obviously drunk. Inside, the place smells less like desperation and more like lavender oil and boiled linen. You catch glimpses of women in matching robes. Nothing scandalous, just simple garments marked with coloured bands at the sleeves. You'll learn later that those colours mean everything. Experience, price, specialty. The Empire has a system for everything, even sin. A tall woman, late 30s, graceful, posture like a queen, introduces herself as Dracena. She is not a madam. She corrects you immediately. She is a registrar of the guild. She manages accounts, settles disputes, and ensures every member pays their dues to the state. Dracena walks with quiet power, like someone who used to survive with her body and now does it with her mind. This is legal work, she says, sitting behind a ledger that looks older than most of the Empire's generals. The state taxes our earnings, audits our rooms, inspects our facilities. If the Emperor wants his roads paved, our silver helps do it. And it's true. Here's your historical fact for the day. In several periods of Byzantine history, especially under emperors like Leo VI, prostitution was not only tolerated, it was systematized. Women were registered, taxes were collected, and portions of those funds went directly into public works. Legal brothels became revenue streams, but legality doesn't mean equality. Dracena shows you one of the ledgers. You see names, payment logs, inspections. What you don't see are the stories behind them. The girl who's 16 and already 4 clients deep a day. The widow who turned to this work because her husband died in a military campaign the Empire won't admit happened. The mother who sends half her coin to a monastery, hoping they'll pray for her child not to hate her someday. This house is better than most, Dracena says. Clean, safe, the girls are not forced. She hesitates before that last word. You ask her what she means. She looks tired now, not physically, existentially. No one puts a knife to their throat, she explains. But when there's nowhere else to go, is it really a choice? That line hits you harder than the rest, because you realise something you hadn't before. Most of these women didn't fall, they were pushed. And then she says something you won't forget. Every woman here has 3 names, the one she was born with, the one she uses here, and the one people call her when they don't want to say the other 2. You sit in silence for a while after that, long enough for her to return to her bookkeeping. The room grows quiet except for the scratch of her pen and the occasional clink of coins being counted in the adjacent room. Then something unusual happens. A door opens at the far end of the hall and out walks a man in the robes of a scholar, fine linen dyed blue trimmed in gold thread. He walks fast, head down, Abibor, like he's embarrassed to have been here but more embarrassed to have been seen leaving. You recognise his face. He teaches in the Imperial Academy. He's written treatises on virtue and purity. Dracena watches him go without blinking. That one, she says, lectures on chastity every Lent. Here's your fringe fact. The guilds didn't just operate in shadows, they had clients at every level of Byzantine society, from street merchants to imperial clerics. And while public morality was paraded in the streets, private indulgence was a backdoor tradition. The city lived in layers, and what happened at night never touched what was preached at dawn. You ask her if anyone ever gets out, leaves, escapes. She smiles, sad and sharp. Some do, but they never leave with what they had before. Not their name, not their family, not their place killed. It's then she tells you about a woman named Melania. Not a saint, not a noble. Just someone who worked the rooms, saved every coin, and eventually opened a bathhouse outside the city. But even then, people called it the brothel in disguise. No one believed she'd changed. The scholarly debate today, whether the guild system protected sex workers or just institutionalized their suffering. Some argue it gave women structure, community, even agency. Others point out that it pinned them to a social identity they could never truly shed, no matter how many laws were passed or prayers recited. As you step out of the guild house, the sun has lowered. The shadows are longer now. You feel older, not in years, but in awareness, like something in you just shifted and won't go back. Down the street, a man slaps a woman hard enough for her to stagger, then pulls her close like it was foreplay. No one intervenes, you watch, and then you walk away. You can't save anyone here, but you can listen, and that's something, right? You return to the Pandakeon that evening, drawn by something you can't quite name. Not curiosity, not guilt. Something between the two, sticky and restless, like a half-remembered song. The alleys are quieter now, emptied of the daytime bustle and filled with torchlight and tension. The city exhales a different breath at night, lower, slower, full of things it doesn't say in the sunlight. Inside the brothel, the air is thick again, just like before. You push through the beads and past familiar faces. The girl with the bandaged ankle limps down the hallway carrying 2 pitchers. One spills, no one helps. A drunk leans on a pillar muttering scripture under his breath, his robe half open. You pretend not to hear it. You're here to find someone, and eventually you do. Ligeia is in the same corner she occupied the first night, bent over a bowl of lentils. The food looks tasteless. She eats it slowly anyway. When she sees you, she doesn't smile. But she nods. You sit down across from her. "You came back," she says. You tell her you've been walking the city, listening. "I thought so. You've got that look now, the one we all get, like you're halfway between throwing up and writing a poem." You ask her about the girls here, how many of them chose this life. She sets her spoon down, eyes narrowing. "Choose is a tricky word," she says. "Some girls walk in because they're hungry, and others because someone they loved pushed them through the door. And some are born so close to the brothel wall, they never knew there was another side." She leans forward, elbows on the table. "I chose to stay. That's not the same as choosing to be here." You let that sit. She doesn't fill the silence. She lets it hurt a little. Then she nods toward the staircase in the back. "You want to see who really didn't choose? Come on, I'll show you." You follow her up the stairs, which creak and groan like they're remembering every foot that's climbed them. The hallway up top is dimmer than below. Candles are rare here. Oil is expensive. Each door is thin, light enough to kick through, and none of them lock from the inside. That tells you everything you need to know. She knocks on one of the doors softly twice. A pause, then she opens it. Inside is a girl, small, barely a shape under a rough wool blanket. She's turned to the wall, her back to you, unmoving. She doesn't talk anymore, Ligeia says. "Not to us, not to anyone. You ask her name. She came in with one. Doesn't use it now. We call her Thistle." The girl flinches at the sound. "She was bought from the Borderlands, one of the Slavic tribes. Uncle sold her, said she'd be safer here than with raiders. He wasn't wrong. But being right doesn't mean you're not cruel." And here it is, your historical truth for the day. A large portion of the Byzantine sex trade was composed of enslaved or trafficked women, particularly from frontier regions, Slavs, Armenians, Persians. Some were taken during military campaigns, others through mercantile transactions. The empire's hunger for order extended to flesh, and the border was a convenient supplier. There was even a word for these women, Zenai, foreigners. But it didn't just mean not from here, it meant other. Less than, conveniently invisible. Thistle shifts slightly under her blanket. You catch a glimpse of her face, young, bruised, eyes ringed in shadows so deep they look like paint. "She's not the only one," Ligeia murmurs. Some of the girls here speak 3 languages, none of them Greek. They don't know the prayers, don't know the laws, so when something bad happens, they think it's supposed to, but that it's their fault for not understanding the rules. You ask how many of them ever leave. Few. The ones who do get married, usually to their patrons, sometimes to the men who bring them here in the first place. That's its own cage. She pauses. I tried leaving once, she says softly. Thought I'd start over in Nicomedia, got as far as the ferry dock. Then I realised I didn't even know how to read a map. And here's your fringe fact. There were cases, documented in imperial records, of women trying to leave the trade, only to be returned forcibly by law or custom, and the logic, once marked as pornai, they were bound to that identity. Society couldn't or wouldn't reinvent them. Even church asylum in many cases was denied. You ask Ligeia if she ever wanted to run again. I used to, she says, but now, I stay for them, she nods at Thistle. At the other closed doors. If I leave, who's going to speak their language? Who's going to get the bruises looked at? Who's going to tell them the difference between what's legal and what's survivable? The scholarly debate rises in your mind like a tide. Was there ever such a thing as agency for these women? Historians argue fiercely. Some say they held small spheres of power within their brothels, setting prices, choosing clients, even forming female-led networks for protection. Others say that's just lipstick on a system of oppression so normalised it looked like choice. You start to ask it another question, but Ligeia waves it off. Enough talk for tonight, she says. You're not here to save us. You're here to understand. That's messier. She leads you back downstairs, past the tired girls and the leering men and the candles that flicker like they're afraid to go out. Outside, the night has deepened. The sky is velvet and starless. The city is quieter. But the silence feels heavy, like it's full of things no one has the breath to say aloud. Ligeia doesn't say goodbye. She just closes the door behind you. And for a moment, standing alone in the dark with the scent of incense still clinging to your skin, you wonder how many names you've already forgotten, how many stories you've only half heard, how many thistles lie curled in their beds right now, too broken to ask for help in a language the Empire never taught them. You breathe deep. Keep walking, Gore. The city waits, but now you walk so much slower. You start to notice the coins, not the way they glint or how they change hands. No, it's subtler than that. It's how people look at them. The way a copper follis lingers on a counter longer than it should, like the air around it is heavier. The way a silver coin disappears too fast, like it's carrying shame with it. You see a priest hesitate before accepting a donation, squinting at the coin's smudged face like he's wondering where it's been. You already know flesh turns a profit in Byzantium, and that profit smells like sweat, wine, and cold metal. Every step you take through Constantinople's inner districts reveals just how much the city owes to the women it pretends not to see. You pass a government office, small, narrow, with rusting chains looped through the gate. A sign outside reads, Imperial Revenue Annex. Ward 3, you wouldn't have looked twice yesterday, but now you know. You know that inside those walls are records of earnings from legal brothels, receipts, rosters, fines. You know that if you had enough time and no fear of being arrested, you could open a drawer and see Ligeia's name, or maybe just her number, next to a tax record. 50 nomismata for the last quarter. Dues paid. All accounted for, as if that somehow made it cleaner. And here's your historical fact of the day. The Byzantine government, at various points in its long tangled history, openly taxed brothels. These weren't hidden or laundered funds. They were logged, stamped and used. Roads were paved, aqueducts repaired, baths maintained, all thanks in part to the industry of the Empire's least respected workers. The state didn't just tolerate brothels, it counted on them. You find yourself standing on a bridge near the Forum, watching a man piss into the water below. The river reflects back the wobbly light of lanterns and moonlight, but all you can think about is that taxes from a brothel paid for the stones under your feet. Maybe the ink on the scholar's lecture scroll came from a brush purchased with a prostitute's coin. Maybe the very food on the emperor's table passed first through a hand bruised by obligation. The irony is almost funny. Almost. You follow the flow of the street toward the market square, where vendors are packing up under the low rumble of evening prayers. A food seller offers you figs at a discount. You decline. He shrugs. Behind him, a wall bears faded graffiti. A name, then a crude drawing of a man and woman, then the word porn in big charcoal letters. No one's cleaned it. No one will. Around the corner you find another Pandakaon. This one quieter, with more wine than women, more conversation than lust. It caters to a different kind of clientele. Soldiers, mid-level scribes, minor merchants. You hear snatches of conversation, complaints about taxes, prices, the weather and, inevitably, women. A man in half armour leans in close to his companion and murmurs something that makes the other man laugh too loud. The sound rings hollow, like a dropped cup. You slip inside, order wine you don't want, and sit in the corner. Eventually a man approaches you, not old but older. Tired face, clean hands. He smells like ink and sheet parchment. He introduces himself as Gavros, a former scribe for the Office of Religious Affairs. Now retired, he says with a grin that doesn't quite reach his eyes. You ask him what that job was like. He chuckles, tiring, mostly writing things people didn't want read, but occasionally enlightening. You push, carefully. Ask him if he ever worked on anything related to the Pornea laws. His expression doesn't change, but something flickers behind his eyes. Oh yes, he says, plenty of those. The church likes to believe it has control, that if we condemn something loud enough, people will stop doing it. But the truth is, everyone knew the rules, and everyone broke them. He leans closer. You know they tax the brothels, yes, but did you know they tax the women themselves? Individual permits, sometimes renewal fees, and if they didn't pay, they'd be branded. Socially, sometimes physically. You ask him what he means by physically. He looks down into his wine, swirls it. There were rumours, he says, that in some parts of the empire, women caught working without a licence were tattooed. On the forehead. Letters that mark them forever. P for porn. You don't erase something like that. That's your fringe fact for the night. And it hits like a rock to the chest. You imagine it. A woman forced into this life, maybe trafficked, maybe desperate, caught working without the proper paperwork and marked like cattle. Marked so that even if she left, even if she married, even if she found the strength to start again, every face she passed would know and judge. You sit with that a while. Eventually, Gavros excuses himself with a polite nod. You don't watch him leave. Outside, the streets are emptying. You walk in silence, feeling the weight of what you've learned pressing against your ribs. But then you turn a corner, and something stops you. A small procession is moving down the road. Candles, incense, singing. At first, you think it's a funeral, but then you see her, dressed in white, holding a small cross, eyes cast downward. A woman being led into a church. A ceremony. You recognise it. She's becoming a penitent. Ligeia mentioned this once in passing, that if a pawn was truly repentant, she could petition the church to leave her old life behind. Not just in private, in public. A procession, prayers, renunciation. But it came with conditions. You had to surrender everything. Earnings, clothing, even your name. You watch as the priest sprinkles her with holy water and speaks in tones too low to hear. She kneels. The people around her nod, but no one touches her. Because here's the scholarly debate. Did penitent prostitutes actually find salvation? Or just a more acceptable kind of isolation? Some say the church welcomed them, gave them sanctuary, protection, even dignity. Others argue that the penitent was still marked, no longer a sinner, but never quite a sister. Her past didn't disappear. It just got reshaped into a cautionary tale. The procession moves on and you're left standing in the afterglow of candles. Alone again. Always alone, it seems, in this city of divided loyalties and layered truths. You wonder how many coins it took to buy her that second chance, and whether it will hold. The wind picks up. Somewhere a bell rings. You head back through the narrow streets, past the vendors and the soldiers and the graffiti, back toward the places that hide in plain sight. You pass a group of boys playing dice near a winehouse. One of them rolls a 6 and cheers, another laughs and shouts, "Pay up, you bastard!" The third holds up a coin and grins. It's silver. It shines in the torchlight. And for just a second you wonder, whose body paid for that coin? Whose salmon has bought the next game? You'll never know, but you keep walking. It's Sunday, and the city smells different. Not cleaner, never clean in Holminder, but infused with incense, warm bread, and the hum of voices lifted in prayer. Constantinople puts on its finest illusions on Sundays. Doors are scrubbed, tunics are pressed. Even the pigeons seem to coo with a little more reverence. From every quarter, bells ring, calling the faithful into domes filled with saints, sunlight, and the sound of feet shuffling across mosaic floors. You let yourself be pulled along by the current, joining the crowd heading toward one of the lesser churches tucked into the city's southern ridge. It's smaller than Hagia Sophia, but no less ornate. An eye-popping blend of marble, gold leaf and ceiling frescoes painted so vividly, you feel like the angels are watching your thoughts, not your face. The priest stands at the altar, beard neatly combed, hands folded just so. You don't know his name, but you've seen his kind before. His voice is syrupy with conviction, heavy with practiced sincerity. And then the sermon starts. Today's theme? Chastity. Of course, he launches in with passion, fire, the kind of language that makes people squirm and nod in equal measure. He speaks of purity, of the stain of lust, of the dangers of women who tempt men into sin. His eyes, sharp and sweeping, land on the faces in the crowd like he's measuring guilt by proximity. You know exactly who he's talking about, even if he never names them. You glance around. There's a woman standing near the back, head covered, eyes lowered, but you recognise her posture. She's from the Pandakayan, you're sure of it. She flinches slightly at every mention of moral decay. No one else seems to notice her discomfort. Or maybe they do and don't care. And here's your historical anchor for the day. The Byzantine Church publicly and consistently condemned prostitution. Patriarchs issued edicts, bishops preached against it. Monastic texts described sexual temptation as one of the devil's favourite tools. And yet, in the same city, sometimes on the same street, the church took tithes from men who'd spent the night in a brothel and showed up the next morning with wine-stained lips and ash on their foreheads. The hypocrisy isn't subtle. It's structural. You don't need fringe facts today. You're living inside the contradiction. After the sermon, people file out slowly. Faces are tight. The sermon struck nerves. Some in guilt, some in pride. You slip out through the side past a deacon who doesn't meet your gaze. He knows who you are. Or at least what you've been poking your nose into. And you're starting to suspect that people like him want people like you to stop asking questions. But you're not done. Not even close. You loop around the church's back courtyard and head down a path you spotted earlier, one that snakes through a small cluster of buildings the clergy use as residences and meeting halls. A young novice sweeps the stone steps. You nod. He looks away. Inside one of the buildings, you hear laughter, and not the pious kind. The door is cracked open. You step closer. Two monks, robes slightly askew, eyes glassy, are sharing a bottle of wine with a man in military garb. On the bench beside them sits a woman in a low-cut tunic, giggling too loudly at a joke that wasn't funny. You catch only a sliver of conversation before the door swings shut. You stand there for a moment, letting the image burn into your brain. And there it is, your fringe fact after all. Despite their official condemnation, some clergy not only tolerated but actively participated in the world of the brothels. There were recorded instances, scribbled in margins, whispered in confessions, and occasionally denounced in imperial courts, of monks frequenting porneia, of priests offering absolution in exchange for favours, of whole monasteries being accused of hiding women for spiritual correction, which everyone knew was just another name for captivity. You ask yourself why no one stopped it. The answer arrives uncomfortably simple, because power protects itself. You wander towards the city wall, where there's less foot traffic and more room to think. The smell of the sea hits you again, brine and kelp and the ever-present stink of fish. You sit on a worn bench near the harbour, watching a group of boys throw stones at gulls. Their laughter rings loud, unburdened. You envy it. Then you hear a voice beside you. "Are you the one asking about the girls?" You turn. The man beside you is pale, balding, with watery eyes and a nose too long for his face. He doesn't introduce himself, just stares at the water like he's speaking to no one in particular. "I work at the monastery of St. Eustathios," he says. "Used to be a deacon. Now I tend to the garden, safer that way." You wait. "I saw things," he continues. "In the back hall. They'd bring girls in through the east gate. Always said it was for their own good, that we were saving them. Baptisms, isolation, prayer. But they weren't allowed to speak, and we weren't supposed to ask their names." You ask him what happened to them. Some left, eventually, with shaved heads and new clothes. Others just disappeared. I stopped asking. You thank him. He doesn't respond. He stands and walks away, feet dragging in the dust. And here's the scholarly debate echoing in your ears. Was the church's involvement in prostitution limited to condemnation, or did it run deeper, into active manipulation, abuse, and control? Some historians claim the church tried to rescue women, offering them penance and peace. Others point out that those rescues often resembled imprisonment. That behind the walls of some monasteries were not just prayers, But alerte, compliance, and the erasure of identity. You think of Ligeia again, of Thistle, of the woman in white becoming a penitent, and you wonder if any of them found peace, or if they just traded one cage for another, quieter one. As you head back into the city, the bells start ringing again, vespers. People gather in doorways to listen. Some cross themselves, others keep working. Somewhere a man screams at his wife. Somewhere else, a girl lights a candle for a mother she hasn't seen in 5 years. You pass a brothel where the door is already open. Music drifts out, a soft stringed instrument, clumsy but sweet. A new girl sits in the doorway, staring at her hands like they don't belong to her. You keep walking. The city watches you go, and behind you the bells keep ringing. It's raining today, not a storm, just a steady, sulking drizzle that makes everything in Constantinople look like it's been smudged by a tired painter's hand. The marble streets shimmer with water and grime. Wooden shutters rattle softly in their frames. Even the cats look unimpressed, hunched beneath carts and awnings, tails twitching in slow, wet annoyance. The city feels quieter in the rain, like it's trying to muffle itself. You find yourself wandering again, pulled by instinct more than plan. There's a part of the city that you haven't spent much time in, the Eleutherios district, just northwest of the Forums. It's where civil offices sit shoulder to shoulder with tailors, bakers and tax collectors. A place where the Empire's mind goes to work. No temples here, no brothels, not openly, but the people who decide what happens to brothels. They live here, work here, write laws behind thick doors and thicker stone walls. You want to see the machine behind the curtain. The main law office, tucked between a marble archive and a bakery that smells like burnt sesame, is smaller than you expect. Humble even. The walls are plastered but chipped. The emblem above the door is faded, barely more than a cross and a pair of scales. You slip inside under the guise of a courier. No one stops you. A clerk glances up, sees the scroll in your hand and nods you down a corridor without a word. You end up in a records room, cold, dry, and lined floor to ceiling with wax-sealed documents and chipped wooden boxes. You find a man already sitting there, quill poised, hunched over a parchment with an expression that says, "I've been doing this for far too long." He doesn't look up when he speaks. "If you're here about inheritance disputes, come back on Wednesdays." You tell him you're looking for something else, something about imperial law, specifically laws concerning prostitution. That gets his attention. He squints up at you, one brow raised. "You a priest?" You shake your head. "Scholar?" You shrug. He waves you toward a bench. "Then you're probably just curious. That's worse." His name is Nicandros. He's a legal scribe, not a judge. He doesn't interpret the law, he writes it down, copies it, files it. In other words, he's spent most of his life elbow deep in the legal machinery of the Empire, and he's got the ink-stained hands and the 1,000-yard stare to prove it. He pulls a scroll from a nearby box, unrolls it and taps at the text with a gnarled finger. "There's your start," he says. "The Ecloga, revised under Leo III, one of the few times the Empire tried to be clear about what to do with prostitutes." You peer at the lines. It's written in stiff, formal Greek, the kind that tries to sound like divine thunder, but mostly just sounds bored. Punishment for solicitation, flogging, exile, property seizure. If a woman was found to be profiting from her own sexual labour, punishment. If a man profited from her labour, still punishment, but less. If a father sold his daughter, circumstantial. Nicandros rolls his eyes. "They like to sound firm on paper," he says, "but in practice, it was all flexible." You press him. "Flexible how?" "Depends who you are," he replies. "A noble's concubine wasn't a whore, she was an ornament. A foreign slave girl in a brothel? A criminal? A soldier caught with a pawn might pay a fine, a monk, he'd be corrected in private, but the girl? Always punished." You let that settle in your chest for a moment. Then you ask him if there was ever any effort to protect the women themselves. He laughs. "Protect? No, but regulate. Oh, yes. And here's your historical truth today. Byzantine law did not outlaw prostitution outright. Instead, it surrounded it with so much legislation about taxation, location, behaviour, and association that it effectively built a legal cage around it. Women were often forced to register with authorities, keep to specific districts, and even adhere to dress codes, veils, certain colours, visual signals to mark them in public. You could walk through a crowd and spot a pawn by her hemline. Nicandros digs around in another box and pulls out a smaller scroll yellowed with age and brittle at the corners. "This one," he says, "is my favourite contradiction." You lean in to read it. It's a legal case summary from the reign of Romanus Ailekapenos. A woman, unnamed, of course was accused of prostitution and fined, but when her clients were brought before the court, they were released on the grounds of imperial service. In other words, if a man was important enough, the law bent for him. Surprise, surprise. You ask Nicandros why he's telling you all this. He shrugs. "I've copied these scrolls for 30 years. No one reads them, not really. They are meant to look impressive, not to be applied." He gestures round at the boxes. Every law about virtue is just an attempt to organise chaos, to give sin a filing number. You ask him if he's ever known any of the women the laws were written about. He pauses, then quietly. "My sister, long ago, after our father died. She worked in the copper quarter for 2 years. I still remember the look in her eyes when she came home, like she was in a room that wouldn't stop spinning." You thank him, not for the papers, for that. As you leave the law office, the rain has picked up. Drops slap against your tunic, cold and rude, but welcome in their honesty. You step into a nearby colonnade and watch as water trickles through the cracks in the stone, running like tears over the faces of worn statues. Here's the scholarly debate swirling in your head. Were Byzantine laws on prostitution designed to help integrate the trade into society, or to isolate and punish the women trapped in it? The laws read like safeguards, set boundaries, ensure health, prevent abuse, but when you peel them back, they're written in a language of containment, not compassion. Outside, a young girl in soaked robes rushes across the street. A man follows, shoving a coin into her palm. She pockets it, keeps walking. That coin will never make it into a ledger, but the system still gets its due. You think of Nicandros again, of the dusty scrolls, of a world wrapped in paper and ink and careful silence. You think of the law, not as a weapon or a shield, but a net. One that catches the weak and lets the strong swim through the holes. And you wonder, who's still tangled in it tonight? You wake to shouting, not the frantic kind that means fire or war, but the slow rising sort that bubbles up from a street dispute and turns theatrical before it turns dangerous. 2 men arguing near a tavern door, one clearly drunk, the other trying hard not to be. The drunk one jabs a finger into the other's chest and slurs something about debts and women. The second man steps back, raises his hands and walks away. Smart. You watch from your window as the drunk collapses onto the cobblestones, muttering curses that feel more about himself than anyone else. It's just past dawn. The sky is still smudged grey with the last of the night, and the city is waking up reluctantly. You hear carts clattering over stone, merchants unlocking shutters, a rooster screaming like it just discovered its own voice. The tavern door opens, and a man in fine sandals steps out, clean, sober, and trying very hard to look like he belongs in a better part of the city. He sees the drunk on the ground, steps over him and keeps walking. One last glance over his shoulder tells you all you need to know. Guilt quickly buried. You head toward the palace district today, not the main halls, those are locked up tighter than a banker's vault, but the outbuildings and side corridors, the places where real conversations happen in half-wee whispers. You've got a name now, passed to you last night in the corner of a brothel you're trying not to remember too vividly. Andronikos, a eunuch who works in the imperial administration, an archivist. Quiet, safe, and apparently someone who knows more than he's supposed to. You find him in a small library behind the old Senate house arranging scrolls with the focus of a man who has trained his whole body to avoid attention. He's tall, slight, with a face that looks like it's never been allowed to age properly. When you approach, he doesn't look up. Who sent you? You tell him the name. He flinches only slightly. I don't owe her anything, he says. You say you're not here for favours, just the truth. That makes him laugh softly. The truth. Dangerous thing in this city. Doesn't wear armour, but it still gets stabbed a lot. You mention brothels. He stops arranging scrolls. The Empire runs on 3 things, he says, finally turning to face you. Oil, grain and silence. But behind those 3 things are 1,000 others, flesh, secrets, compromise. You want to know how brothels really function here. You'll need more than sympathy, you'll need patience. You ask him what he means. I mean, they're not just pleasure houses, he says. They're pressure valves, places to let off steam, yes, but also places to collect information. People talk when their trousers are around their ankles. Especially powerful people. And here's your historical fact of the day. Brothels in Byzantine cities weren't just sexual spaces. In many cases, they doubled as informal intelligence hubs. Information flowed freely in these places. Military secrets, trade plans, personal scandals. It wasn't unusual for eunuchs or agents to pay sex workers not for their bodies, but for what they overheard. Andronikos taps a scroll on the table. This one's coded. A ledger of gifts made to a particular house near the Golden Horn, but the amounts are too regular. Too symmetrical. It's not coin, it's reports. Messages passed through coded entries, disguised as bribes. You ask him who the reports were going to. He pauses. Then softly, the Empress is in a circle, or so we believe. The room feels colder now. You ask at how involved the palace really is. In all of it? He shrugs. That depends on who's sitting on the throne. Some emperors turn a blind eye. Some pretend to care. A few even use the system for themselves. But it's the women who pay. Either way. Always. You press him on the subject of eunuchs, their role, their power. Most assume we're harmless, he says with a small tired smile. They forget we are trained for loyalty, precision, memory. We're not soldiers, but we are weapons. He leans in now, voice barely above a whisper. There are brothels run by eunuchs, high-class ones, the kind that don't look like brothels. The kind that serve only the elite, senators, bishops, even foreign diplomats. They think because we're safe, we don't judge. And they're right. We don't. But we remember. And here's your fringe fact. There are scattered records of male brothels, especially those catering to men of power, being run quietly by eunuchs. These establishments offered both discretion and leverage. The eunuchs didn't need to seduce. They just had to listen. You ask him if he's ever blackmailed someone. He smiles without smiling. Information is only dangerous if you use it. I prefer to let people destroy themselves with it. Easier on the conscience. You sit with that a while. The candle flickers between you, casting long shadows on the table. You can hear the heartbeat of the city outside, a slow, muddy thrum. It occurs to you that there's a whole empire functioning beneath the one they paint in frescoes. One made of whispers and veils and names spoken in locked rooms. Andronikos stands. You've heard enough for one morning, he says. Go before someone starts to wonder why you're here. You thank him. As you leave the building, you spot a palace guard standing at the far end of the corridor. He doesn't move, just watches. You look away first. Outside, the air is dry again. The rain's past, leaving behind puddles and that sharp, clean smell you almost forgot the city was capable of. You cross the square quietly, checking over your shoulder more than once. Here's your scholarly debate for the day. Were eunuchs in Byzantium protectors of imperial order or hidden manipulators behind the throne? Some see them as loyal servants, bound by castration to service and neutrality. Others argue they were the ultimate survivors, sharp, strategic, often more powerful than the people they were supposed to serve. You're starting to lean toward the second. As you pass a wine stall, you hear a familiar laugh. Ligeia. She's inside, half-shadowed, sipping from a chipped cup. She sees you, raises her drink in a mock toast. Still alive? She asks. You nod. She grins. Then you're not asking hard enough questions. You decide to ask about her past. Not because you think it will change anything or redeem what you've already seen, but because the longer you stay in this city, the more you understand that survival isn't just about the present. It's rooted in what came before, and if anyone has a before worth digging into, it's Ligeia. You find her again that night, sitting in the doorway of the Pandikeon like it's her personal throne, bare feet flat against the stone, eyes half-lidded, like a cat watching for danger. A breeze curls past, tugging her hair over one shoulder, and for a second she looks like a statue of someone who mattered. You sit beside her without asking. I'm not working tonight, she says flatly, not looking at you. You tell her you don't want anything from her. Just a story. That gets a laugh. Low, dry, a little surprised. No one wants a story from a woman like me, she mutters, unless they think it'll end in a confession or a miracle. You shrug. She finally turns her head and looks at you. Really looks at you, like she's deciding whether or not to let something out. Then, you ever hear of Empress Theodora? You nod. The former prostitute, you say. Yea. Her smile tightens. That's the version they let survive, the sanitized one, the patron saint of sinners. She rose from the brothel to the throne and then tried to shut the doors behind her. Everyone loves a redemption arc. They just don't want to hear about the parts that don't fit. You ask her to tell you. Ligeia leans back against the doorframe. The lantern above swings gently, casting moving shadows on her face. She was born low, like really low. Father was a bear trainer at the Hippodrome, died when she was little. Her mother tried to get her and her sisters into the theatre, but back then, theatre girls were more flesh than art. Theodora performed, sure, danced, but everyone knew what came after the curtain call. She pauses, eyes scanning the quiet street. And she worked in the brothels too, not the regulated ones, the dirty ones, the riverfront holes. Word is she did things other women wouldn't, not because she wanted to, but because it paid more and she needed out. You ask how she got from there to the palace. She caught the eye of a Syrian official, followed him east. Left him when she realised he didn't love her. He just liked owning her. Spent some time living with monks in Alexandria. People say that's when she found God. Or maybe just a better idea of power. Came back to Constantinople with a new name, a new story. Met Justinian, the emperor's nephew. And here's your historical truth for today. Theodora, before becoming empress, was an actress and likely a courtesan, a term that in Byzantine society often overlapped with prostitution. Procopius, her contemporary, writes scathingly about her early life, though his accounts are considered biased. Regardless, it's generally accepted she rose from the margins of society to one of its highest thrones. She married Justinian, became co-ruler, and eventually passed laws improving the status of women, including outlawing certain forms of forced prostitution and granting greater protection to former sex workers. Ligeia smirks, like she's reading your thoughts. Yes, she passed laws, she says. Closed some of the worst brothels, made it harder to traffic girls, even opened safe houses for women trying to leave the life. You ask her if it helped. Some, she admits, but even Theodora couldn't erase how people see us. The emperor might legalize something or criminalize it, but society remembers what you were. That's the curse. She lifts her hand, gestures toward the street, the city, the empire. You could be an empress and still be whispered about in market stalls. You could save lives and still be remembered as the girl who danced naked for coins. And here's your fringe fact. After her death, Theodora was canonized in parts of the Eastern Church as a saint. But even as she became holy in the eyes of some, others refused to let go of her past. In fact, secret history, Procopius's infamous and venomous gossip record, depicted her as a schemer, a seductress, a manipulator, a woman who could never truly be forgiven for having once sold her body, even if she had helped reshape an empire. You ask Ligeia what she thinks Theodora would say if she walked into this brothel right now. She laughs, hard this time. She'd probably kick half the men in the teeth and drag the girls into a nunnery, but she'd still look at me like I was a reminder. You frown. A reminder of what? Ligeia looks up at the stars, or maybe just past them, that no matter how high you climb, someone will always point back to the dirt under your nails. You sit with that. The street is quiet. A dog barks in the distance, short and bored. The lantern hums softly as its flame dances behind thick glass. Then Ligeia sighs, long and low. I used to dream I was her, she says. Not the saint. The girl. I'd close my eyes and imagine it was me walking out of that river, dressed in linen, reborn. But I never got to Alexandria. Never found God. Just different clients with different names. You ask her if she still dreams. Only sometimes, she says. And when I do, I'm never me. I'm just a voice in the background telling someone else's story. And here's your scholarly debate of the night. Was Theodora a true reformer for women or just an exceptional survivor who closed the door behind her? Some scholars see her as a revolutionary who changed imperial policy from the inside out. Others argue that her reforms were narrow, designed to cleanse the empire's image more than actually uplift its forgotten daughters. After all, most of the women she supposedly saved are still unnamed, still undocumented, still silent. You rise slowly, nod to Ligeia. She doesn't return the gesture, just closes her eyes again like the night is a blanket she's finally decided to pull over her face. As you walk away, her voice drifts after you, barely audible, like a ghost of something never said aloud. Even empresses sleep alone sometimes. You're woken by bells again, this time not from churches, but from a procession echoing through the cobbled streets like a slow-moving storm. You hear chanting, the occasional clash of cymbals, and the distinct bark of imperial guards clearing a path ahead. From your window you see them, robed clerics, civic officials, and behind them what looks like a single cart covered in a pale shroud. It's not a saint's relic, it's not an emperor's parade. This is something quieter, sadder. You pull on your shoes and step out to follow it. The procession winds toward the edge of the city, far from the polished forums and golden domes. The crowd is thin, nobody's throwing flowers, no one's bowing. You pass a couple whispering about a girl named Syra, and a man shaking his head, muttering, "Should have stayed hidden." At the city's fringe the cart stops, the cloth is pulled back. A body, young, female, dressed in plain white, hands crossed over her chest, no name spoken, just a prayer from a priest who recites the rites quickly, like he's late for something else. You don't need to ask to know, she was a Pawnee. They're burying her quietly, efficiently in unconsecrated ground. And there it is, the historical fact for the day. In much of the Byzantine period, prostitutes were denied burial in hallowed cemeteries unless they had publicly repented and received absolution. Otherwise, they were given the minimal rites, or none at all, and laid to rest in marginal spaces, outside city walls, near trash heaps, or in mass graves. It was as if their lives didn't qualify for closure. You watch as two men lower her into the earth. No one cries, no one places a flower. The shroud becomes dirt, and dirt becomes silence. You stay until the last spade of soil is pressed flat. Then you walk. There's a tension under your skin now, a low hum of anger you didn't invite. You've seen her face before, Syra's, or one like hers. Maybe it was the girl at the wine house who kept checking the window. Maybe it was Thistle, still curled under her blanket. Or maybe it was Ligeia's voice when she talked about dreaming of being someone else. Whoever she was, she's gone now, forgotten by the city she helped sustain. You head east, toward a part of Constantinople most people pretend doesn't exist. You're looking for someone specific today. A woman named Ecdosia. Ligeia mentioned her once, between bites of pickled fish and complaints about taxes. She said Ecdosia used to be one of the best, beautiful, connected, sharp, but tried to leave the life. Now she's a laundress, or a midwife, or something else entirely depending on who you ask. It takes hours of wrong turns, bribes, and deliberate ignoring of threats, but you find her in a cellar, lit by 2 oil lamps and the afternoon sun slipping through cracks in the stone. She's sitting beside a steaming cauldron, stirring fabric into the water with a long stick. Her hands are red and cracked, and her back bends with the weight of years you can't see on her face. You introduce yourself. She barely looks up. "Whatever you're selling, I can't afford it." You say you're not selling anything, that you're asking about women who've left the brothels. Now she looks, her eyes are sharp but tired. "What's it matter to you?" You tell her you're just trying to understand. That gets a chuckle. There's nothing to understand. You just get tired. Of the faces, of the lies, of being someone else's sin. She stands slowly, walks to a stool, and gestures for you to sit. You do. "You think it's hard being in a brothel," she says. "Try being out. You're free, sure, but you're also nothing. No job wants you. No husband will touch you. The church, they'll bless you if you beg, but they'll never look you in the eye." You ask how she survives. Laundry, deliveries, and quiet services for quiet women. She means abortions, births, hidden medicine for bruises no one reports. You ask how many women she's helped. She shrugs. Dozens, maybe more. Most just come once. They don't want to be seen with me. I remind them of too much. You glance around. The room is clean but bare. A few herbs hang drying near a cracked window. A single loaf of bread sits on a chipped plate. This is what freedom looks like. And here's your fringe fact. While some former prostitutes in Byzantium managed to carve out modest lives after leaving the trade, most face significant stigma. Even with imperial laws that technically allowed them to remarry or enter other forms of labour, society rarely forgave. The name pawn stuck like oil. You could scrub yourself raw and it would still cling. You ask her if she ever thinks about going back. She looks at you like you just suggested she jump off a bridge. "Back?" she spits. "To that? No, I may be invisible now, but at least my pain is mine." You sit in silence for a while, letting the steam and the weight of her words settle. Then she adds, almost as an afterthought, "But I do miss being seen. Not for my body, just seen." There it is, the scholarly debate of the day playing out in real time. Was the Byzantine social structure capable of true reintegration for former sex workers? Some argue that with enough repentance and time, women could be restored to respectability. Others point out the mountain of anecdotal and legal evidence that suggests otherwise. One stain, one slip, and you were marked for life. Even saints couldn't change that. As you leave Ectosia's cellar, she presses a sprig of rue into your hand. For protection, she says, you ask too many questions. You tuck it into your pocket and climb back into the street. The sun's already sinking, casting long orange streaks across the sky. People are lighting torches, closing shutters. A man passes with a bundle of bread under his arm, whistling a hymn with a cracked voice. You follow the curve of the road past the city wall, where Syra was buried just hours before. You find the fresh mound of dirt. No stone, no marker. You kneel, not in prayer exactly, just to remember. One name, one life, that's something. You cisper it just once. Syra. And then you walk back into the city. The air is colder now, the shadows longer. But at least for a moment someone said her name. The next time you hear the word brothel, it's being spat, not spoken. A boy, no older than 10, shouts it at a woman passing in front of the fish market. She's not dressed any differently from the other women there. Shawl drawn over her head, sleeves rolled up to her elbows, a basket on one arm. But someone recognised her, or thought they did. Maybe she worked a brothel once, maybe she didn't. Doesn't matter. The word lands like a rock thrown through glass. Heads turn, voices drop, the woman keeps walking, but her pace quickens. The boy laughs like he's won something. You watch, stomach tightening, as the woman disappears into the alleys near the old aqueduct. You could follow. You don't. You know what you find? A woman trying to make a life out of the pieces people still let her carry. There's a tension in the air today. Something brittle that makes people hurry their footsteps and glance twice over their shoulders. Rumour is the palace has issued a new round of decrees. Nothing official, just whispers passed from mouth to mouth. Something about morality, cleanliness, reform. Whenever the empire feels fragile, it sharpens its laws like knives. And the first to bleed are always the ones no one will defend. You head toward a different district today, the one the locals call Anatolikon. Tucked between the docks and the dye quarter. The streets here are narrow, packed with wooden homes that lean inward like they are trying to whisper to each other. This is the part of the city where unwanted things are put. Trash, smells, people. It's also where you find the brothel that doesn't even bother to pretend it's anything else. It's not a house. It's a structure stitched together from mismatched stone of planks and sailcloth. There's no sign, no candles. Just a cracked door and a single slumped figure sitting outside. A man with a shaved head, a face full of scars, and hands that look like they've broken more than bones. He doesn't stop you, just nods once, as if to say, "You were warned." Inside, the darkness eats sound. The floor is packed dirt. The walls are curtains. The only light comes from a pair of oil lamps hung on rusty hooks, casting everything in a dull orange glow. The women here don't wear silk or fake smiles, they wear bruises. Layers of them, some fresh, some fading. All unspoken. One of them approaches. She doesn't introduce herself. Just studies your face like she's trying to decide what you want, what you're really here for. When you say the word story, her expression doesn't change. Then she turns and walks away. You follow. You pass through another curtain into a room that smells like vinegar and despair. She sits on a mat. You sit across from her. Her name, she says, is Nemea. That's not her real name, but it's what they call her here. She doesn't remember the first name she was given, or rather, she doesn't say it. There are things she's buried so deeply she's not sure they're hers anymore. She starts to talk, not because she trusts you, but because it's been a long time since anyone asked her anything that didn't come with a price. You know what happens when a woman's punished with pleasure, she asks. You blink. That's what this place is, she says, gesturing to the sagging walls. This is where they send women as punishment. Thieves, blasphemers, wives who don't obey, daughters who sneak out at issue. It's cheaper than prison and more profitable. And here it is, your historical fact for the day. In the Byzantine Empire, being forced into prostitution was sometimes used as a form of state-sanctioned punishment. Women who committed moral offences, adultery, defiance, even speaking out in public, could be condemned to brothels, not just as a way to humiliate them, but to make their punishment economically productive. Empire-sanctioned shame with a payout. Naomi goes quiet for a while. She picks at her sleeve. Her arms are covered in burns. You ask her about them. She shrugs. Man who runs this place likes to brand his girls when they fight back. Says it makes the clients more curious. You ask her if she's ever tried to escape. She smiles, just a little. It's not a hopeful smile. Once. Got 3 blocks before the city guard found me. They brought me back with my arms tied like a goat's. The man gave them a bottle of wine as thanks. There's no anger in her voice, just facts. You ask her how many other women are here. 10, maybe 12. It changes, some die, some vanish. Sometimes a priest comes to pray with us, that's the worst, because he's the only one who looks like he's doing you a favour. And here's your fringe fact, there are records, rare, fragile things of brothels like this existing on the very edge of legal awareness. Places where punishment and exploitation blurred so thoroughly they became indistinguishable. The state denied their existence. The church condemned them publicly, but said nothing when donations came from the men who frequented them. Whispers speak of pleasure houses for the fallen, where women were sent to be reformed, but everyone knew they were being erased. You ask Nimia what she wants. She doesn't answer. Just stands and walks to the corner, where a small bowl of water rests beneath an icon barely visible in the gloom. A faded Virgin Mary, one eye scraped away. I ask her every night, she says, for sleep. That's all. Not freedom, not justice, just enough sleep to forget what I am. And then she whispers something you almost don't catch. It was my father who sold me. The candle wavers. A gust of air sneaks through the curtain. You sit with that. No lecture, no moral. Just the sound of someone trying not to cry in front of a stranger. The scholarly debate for today is harder to stomach. It asks, when is punishment simply repackaged exploitation? Some argue that forced prostitution was a separate system, distinct from the trade, used only in rare cases. Others say that line was never real, that punishment was just another word for opportunity in the empire's economy of flesh. If a body could generate revenue, then sin was simply a form of taxation. You stand. She doesn't stop you. Outside, the sun has gone. The air is sharp, metallic. You wonder if anyone's ever come looking for her, if anyone even remembers she existed. You turn once to glance back at the door. The man outside is sharpening a blade against a stone. Not fast, not with purpose. Just something to do. Something to keep his hands busy until the next girl runs. You walk faster this time. And as you pass the fish market again, the same boy calls another woman a whore. No one stops him. It's strange, the things you begin to hear once your ears are trained. Not just the obvious murmurs, slurs hissed under breath, the telltale clink of coins changing hands outside curtained doors, but the subtler notes. A different cadence in a seller's voice when speaking to a woman in foreign dress. A pause when someone asks for directions in a strange accent. The way laughter dies when someone realises the girl dancing in the square isn't from here. You begin to notice that not all brothel workers speak Greek, and not all of them understand what's happening to them until it's far too late. You spend the morning walking the southern quarter of the city, near the bustling Zerolophos district, where trade goods pour in from every direction. Spices, silks, jewellery, animals, and, more quietly, people. You've heard whispers about a specific warehouse not far from the seawalls. It's marked on no map. It doesn't advertise. But somehow, everyone seems to know it's there. You find it by following the trail of silence, a street where no one makes eye contact, where doors shut a little faster when you pass, and where the smell of lavender can't quite cover up something far more human. The building looks ordinary enough. Stone lower walls, upper floor built of wood, painted a dull blue that flakes in the breeze. A single iron ring beside the door, once meant for tying up carts or horses, is now used for something else entirely. You knock, you don't wait for permission, you just step inside. The interior smells like sweat and seawater. A desk sits at one end, covered in ledgers. Behind it, a man with a mouth too small for his face looks up, clearly annoyed. "Wrong door," he says. You tell him you're looking for work, something flexible, something discreet. That makes him laugh. A short, ugly sound. "Speak Greek?" You nod. Good. Most of the girls don't. He eyes you up and down, then waves a hand. "Go see Alkenis upstairs." You go. The upper level's cleaner, but not by much. It's quieter here, too quiet, until you hear it. A soft, rhythmic crying. Not loud, not desperate, just steady, like someone who's practiced. A door opens at the end of the hall. A woman steps out. Early 40s, dressed in red, her hair piled high, her face sharp with makeup meant to distract from how tired she looks. "This is Alkenis," she sizes you up quickly. "You're not here to work," she says. You admit it. She sighs, folds her arms. "So you're another one of those sympathy vultures, going to write sad little verses about broken girls and then vanish?" You tell her no, that you're trying to understand. She leans against the doorframe. "Then look," she says, and pushes the door behind her wide open. Inside, a long room lined with straw mats and chipped basins, 10, maybe 12 women sitting or lying in silence. Some stare at the ceiling, some hum quietly to themselves. One rocks back and forth. None speak, none move to greet you. "They're new," Alkenis says. "Came in 3 nights ago, Slavs mostly, couple of Persians, one Gothic girl, fierce little thing, bit one of the guards when they tried to wash her. Took 3 of them to hold her down." You ask where they were brought from. "Does it matter?" she replies. "They are here now. And here's your historical fact for today. A significant portion of prostitutes in Byzantine brothels were not native Greeks or Romans. They were Slavic, Armenian, Persian, Gothic, captives of war, victims of raids, or simply sold by desperate families. The Byzantines were expert traders, and flesh was no exception. The imperial economy depended not only on what was produced within, but what could be imported. Commodities, yes, but also bodies." Alkenis walks slowly past the women, her fingers trailing along the edge of one of the mats. "They don't understand what's happened to them," she says. "They just know they're not going home." You ask what happens next. We clean them, we train them, we tell them to smile. Eventually they learn to fake it. And if they don't, we send them to the places that don't mind broken goods. You ask her how she lives with it. Her answer is immediate. "I stopped asking that question years ago. You don't survive this work by having a soul, you survive it by renting it out." She kneels beside a girl with copper hair and eyes like stormwater. "This one? Her name was Mira. At least, I think that's what she was trying to say. Now she answers to Songbird. Makes it easier for the clients." You nod toward the others. "Do any of them ever get out?" Alkenis laughs, but it sounds more like coughing. "Out! Only if someone buys them for real. Not for a night. For life. A patron. A rich man. Someone with use for something more than a warm bed." And here's your fringe fact. Among foreign sex workers, the concept of being redeemed through purchase was disturbingly common. Wealthy clients would sometimes rescue a girl by buying her outright, either turning her into a concubine, a servant, or, in rare cases, a wife. But the transaction was never about freedom. It was about changing cages. You ask Alkenis if any of the girls here even want to be saved. She looks at you, eyes narrowed. They want their mothers, their brothers. They want the faces they saw last before the door closed. But they're smart enough not to ask for what they can't have. A quiet voice behind you murmurs something. You turn. One of the women has sat up. Mira. She repeats it slower this time. "Domoi." You recognize it. Slavic. It means home. The word cuts clean through the air. Alkenis stiffens, then walks away, back down the hall. You follow. She stops at the stairs and turns back once. "You can write whatever you want," she says. "Tell people how cruel it is, how tragic, but nothing will change. They'll weep into their wine cups and still visit the girls next week." You descend the stairs in silence. Outside, the harbour stinks of fish, piss and brine. The sky is a flat grey, heavy and unsympathetic. You look back once. The building looms like a tumour. Here's your scholarly debate. Was the sex trade in Byzantium simply an unfortunate byproduct of conquest and commerce, or was it an integral mechanism, deliberately engineered, silently supported? Some historians argue it was accidental, a grim consequence of empire. Others believe it was fully systemic, baked into the infrastructure, reinforced by law, economy, and even theology. You're starting to see the latter. You turn your collar against the wind and walk into the crowd, wondering how many languages echo through this city, how many names are lost before they're even learned. You pass a group of soldiers joking in Latin, a vendor shouting in Armenian, a child counting coins in Persian. You hear Mira's voice again, faint and clear in your memory, Domoi, and you wonder how many girls here remember what that word even means. You've been looking for something more obscure today, not hidden behind curtains or whispered in doorways, but buried deeper than even the city seems to realise. It started with a single line you overheard last night, tossed like a joke by a merchant drunk on pomegranate wine. They say the bishop has a taste for boys. The others at the table laughed. One muttered something about hypocrisy. Then they moved on, as though they hadn't just cracked open a new jagged vein of truth. Now, in the early haze of dawn, you follow the trail backward. You start at the edge of the old training quarter, near the barracks, where young men practice with spears, swords, and the art of not asking too many questions. The area pulses with youth. Boys with fresh faces and scraped knuckles fill the air with laughter and curses. Their bodies already sculpted by the demands of the Empire. You slip between them unnoticed, one more shadow in a city that forgets too easily. Your destination is not a brothel. Not officially. It's called a scholion, a boys' hostel attached to a private tutoring house, funded partially by the church, partially by anonymous donors. Some come here to study, some come because they have nowhere else to go, and some are chosen for other reasons. Inside it smells of ink, wool, and wet stone. A man greets you, stern, robed, a teacher, likely. He assumes you're a parent, an uncle, maybe a patron. You ask about apprenticeships, educational advancement, discipline. He's polite, if guarded, his words smooth with the practiced rhythm of someone used to inspection. Then you ask casually, what happens to boys without sponsors? He doesn't smile anymore. We do what we can, he says. Those without support are often redirected. They serve the city in other ways. You press, just slightly. He hesitates, then leans in, voice quieter now. There are places, he says. Private rooms, arrangements made. The church doesn't approve officially, but they tolerate it. Better this than starvation. No? You don't answer. You don't have to. He excuses himself soon after, leaves you alone in a side hall. You find a boy sitting by the doorway, barefoot, thin, his tunic too short. He's tracing something in the dirt with a stick, a pattern. You ask his name. Isaiakios, he says without looking up. You sit beside him. You ask how long he's been here. 2 winters, he says. I was supposed to learn reading, numbers, but they said I wasn't clever enough. Now I sweep. I serve guests. You ask what kind of guests. He shrugs. Men who smell like incense. Some in armour. One man wears rings on every finger. I don't like him. He glances at you. You're not here for me, are you? You shake your head. Of course. He nods, almost relieved. Almost. And here's your historical fact for today. While the Byzantine Empire officially condemned homosexuality both in civil and religious law, there is ample evidence buried in court records and theological treatises that male-male sexual exploitation, especially involving young boys, occurred with disturbing regularity, particularly within educational or religious institutions. It was condemned publicly but tolerated privately, especially when the perpetrators were wealthy, powerful, or cloaked in religious authority. A priest arrives shortly after, and Isaiakios disappears down the hall without another word. The priest gives you a look, half curiosity, half always deeply warning, and turns away. You walk out in spottance, back onto the street where boys become men too quickly, or are used up before they ever get the chance. Later that afternoon, you meet someone who confirms what you already fear. His name is Nikitas, a former monk. Expelled, he says, for disciplinary issues, though he tells you with grim certainty that what really got him cast out was speaking up. It was the bishop, he says. Everyone knew. He kept 2 boys in his guest wing, called them assistants, sent them to do errands in the middle of the night. They never spoke, just stared ahead like their souls were somewhere else. You ask why no one stopped it. Nikitas laughs bitterly. Because the bishop donates gold every year to the orphanage. Because he funded the new baptistry. Because when sin comes in a cassock, no one wants to see it. You ask him what happened to the boys. One was sent away, far, some monastery in Cappadocia. The other, I think he died. Or maybe he ran. I only know he was gone one day, like he never existed. Here's your fringe fact. There are documented cases, scattered and often censored, of young male sex workers in Byzantine cities, especially around ports and elite districts, operating outside the visible brothel system. Some were enslaved, some were groomed by patrons, others were simply too poor to say no. But because their stories didn't fit into the typical moral narratives about female chastity and redemption, they were often erased entirely. You ask Nikitas what he thinks the church believed about boys like Isaiakios. He looks down. They believed what was convenient. That boys forget, that boys heal, that boys don't talk. But Isakios remembers. You're sure of it. And that brings us to today's scholarly debate. To what extent did the empire acknowledge and regulate male prostitution? The evidence is slim, but damning. Some argue it was a fringe issue. Aberrations, not institutions. Others believe it was simply folded into the wider economy of flesh, tolerated where it served power and hidden where it threatened image. As you walk back toward the city centre, you pass another scolion. This one is larger, well kept. Painted walls, smiling instructors, and boys in fine sandals reciting verses from Homer. You wonder if Isakios knows these boys, if he envies them, if they envy him, because some of them will grow up to be bishops, others to be soldiers, but a few, just a few, will end up in that same long room, learning how to keep their mouths shut and their eyes empty. The city breathes around you, its secrets layered like sediment, each one heavier than the last. You think about Ligeia, about Mira, about Sira, and now about Isakios. Different bodies, same system, different sins, same saints. You return to the churches, not for answers, those have become slippery things, but to observe the way the incense rolls like fog across the mosaic floors, the way icons tilt their eyes downward, almost as if ashamed to be watching. The city is flush with sacred places, and yet you notice how hollow some of them feel. Not emptied, not exactly, just curated, maintained. Like the memory of holiness is being performed rather than believed. You find yourself at the church of St. Mochio, modest compared to the gold-drenched splendour of Hagia Sophia, but busy. People stream in and out. Candles flicker like nervous thoughts, and near the altar, a woman kneels, young, trembling, whispering something over and over as if the words will break if spoken too loudly. She's dressed well, clearly not from the streets, but there's something familiar in the way she hunches her shoulders, like she's trying to disappear into the floor. You sit nearby and wait. Eventually she finishes. She doesn't stand, just glances toward the door and then back to the icon, uncertain if she's finished being forgiven. You introduce yourself gently, tell her you're writing about women who've changed lives. That seems safer than naming it. She nods, slowly. Her voice is small, but her words are sharp. I pay for prayers now. You blink. His smile's a bitter thing. It's easier than confessing. You find a priest with the right appetite and enough debt, and he'll let you slip a coin in instead of a sin. They call it a donation, but it buys the same thing, absolution, and you don't have to tell him what happened. You ask her what happened. She laughs. I used to work the palaces, not as a whore, not officially, just a handmaid. But you can't scrub floors in a senator's home without catching their gaze eventually. You ask her name. They called me Anna, probably still do, but that's not mine anymore. You press a little more. Why here? Why now? 'Cause I'm tired of paying to be clean, she says. The money runs out faster than the guilt. And sometimes I wonder if these priests are just laundering sin. And here's your historical truth for today. While Byzantine Christianity outwardly condemned prostitution, the church itself often accepted donations from known sex workers or their patrons. It was an open secret. Wealth earned from brothels was quietly welcomed into the hands of abbots and bishops, used to build chapels, fund poorhouses, even commission icons. Some priests believed any donation purified the giver. Others just liked the coins. You thank her. She stands without another word and walks away, disappearing into the crowd as if the floor swallowed her. You stay seated for a while, watching people shuffle up to kiss the relics and light candles. One man drops a gold coin into the offering box. His fingers linger on the edge, and he closes his eyes like he's bargaining with a god who negotiates. Later that evening, you follow a different trail, one that leads to the monastery of St. Thecla. It's quiet, peaceful, the kind of place people imagine when they think of penance. Inside, a nun leads you to a side chamber. She doesn't ask who you are or why you've come. She just says she's waiting. The room is spare. A bench, a single icon. A woman in grey robes sits by the window, stitching fabric with fingers so careful you think they might shake if they stop moving. She doesn't look up. I know what you're here for, she says. Everyone wants the story of the fallen woman who found salvation. You ask her if she found it. She smiles, not kindly, just knowingly. I found quiet. That's different. Her name is Ligeia. She doesn't say what her name was before. I came here after I lost a child, she says. Not mine, a client's. He beat her. Then he paid me to bury the body in a dry well. I carried her down myself. You say nothing. You want the truth? The church doesn't erase your past. It just puts a veil over it, makes it quieter, teaches you not to scream. She runs her fingers over the embroidery in her lap. It's a simple pattern, circles stitched into circles, no end in sight. Sometimes, she says, they come here, the men, the ones who used us. They pretend not to recognize me, and I pretend not to remember. That's how peace works. You ask her if she believes in forgiveness. She shrugs. I believe in forgetting. And here's your fringe fact. There were known instances of prostitutes entering religious life, sometimes even becoming abbesses or spiritual leaders. But even in the cloister, their pasts clung to them. Some monasteries accepted them with open arms, others only under strict vows of silence and seclusion. Repentance wasn't just about redemption, it was about being useful again. You ask if she ever thinks of leaving. She doesn't answer, but she doesn't shake her head either. As you leave, the nun at the door presses a small loaf of dark bread into your hand. You thank her. She nods, and nothing more is said. Outside, the city is dimmed. Torches flicker like slow stars. You walk through a marketplace half-packed for the night. Crates stacked like tombstones, the smell of smoked fish lingering in the air. You sit near a crumbling fountain and break off a piece of the bread. It's coarse, bitter. You wonder how many prayers were bought today, how many sins were dipped in wax, lit at the foot of an icon, and left to smoulder. And here's your scholarly debate. Did the church's acceptance of money from sex workers represent hypocrisy or pragmatism? Some scholars claim it was a calculated strategy, absorbing wealth regardless of its origin to reinforce the church's reach. Others suggest it was a form of grace, proof that even the darkest earnings could be redirected toward light. You're not sure which side is right, but you do know this. The coins don't care who earned them. They just go where they're told. The wind off the Bosphorus smells like secrets tonight. Cold, salt heavy, and just sharp enough to sting your eyes. You're back near the Imperial Harbour, watching the ships slide in under cover of dusk, their sails collapsing like tired lungs. You count them. 3 merchant vessels, 1 barge, and something sleeker, lower. Not a warship, not a cargo hauler. Something else. No flags, no visible crew. You watch as it docks at the far end of the quay where the lamps don't reach and the guards pretend not to see. Within minutes its hull is empty, and its shadowy passengers scatter like spilled ink into the city's dark folds. You follow one of them. She moves quickly, her cloak low over her face, heels clicking soft against the stones. She doesn't look like a labourer. Too upright, too sure of where she's going. You trail her through the spice quarter, past the shuttered stalls and down a side alley that curves behind a bathhouse. She slips through a door that looks abandoned, flaking paint, iron hinges rusted to memory. You wait. Then knock. A narrow-eyed man answers. He doesn't ask who you are, just steps aside. Inside it's warm, plush even. Carpets, drapes, laughter floating from somewhere behind a curtain. Music, soft, foreign, string-stringed. This is no den of desperate coin. This is a house built for indulgence. A woman in silver robes meets you. She smiles, the kind of smile that costs money. You tell her you're not a customer. Then you're a risk, she replies. Come. She leads you through a maze of scented halls to a chamber, lit only by low-burning oil lamps. There, the woman you followed is sitting on a divan, brushing her hair. She looks up, neither surprised nor alarmed, just observant. You followed me, she says. You nod. And now you want to know who we are. Again you nod. She gestures to a stool. You sit. You're not a brothel, she says. Not officially. Not by the Empire's definition. No taxes, no registration. No paper trail. You ask what that makes them. She considers this. Espionage. You blink, and here's your historical fact. In the Byzantine Empire, particularly in Constantinople's elite circles, certain brothel-like establishments doubled as information networks. Courtesans, especially those serving wealthy or political clients, were often prized not just for their bodies, but for what they could overhear. The empire was built on more than gold and theology. It ran on secrets. Our girls, she says, speak 3 languages each. They know when to talk and when not to. They're trained in conversation memory and lies. You ask who trained them. She smiles again, this one sharper. The same people who trained me. You ask if she works for the state. She doesn't answer, which is an answer. She rises and walks to a low table, pouring dark wine into 2 cups. The scent is strong, spiced with cinnamon and something more bitter. She hands you one. Do you know what a hetaira is? She asks. You nod. The term originated in classical Greece. Companion, courtesan, not just a body but a presence. A tool of influence. We use the word now as armour, she says. A way to be both within and beyond the rules. A woman can't speak in the council, but she can whisper in the ear of someone who does. And if she's good, she makes sure what she whispers ends up shaping policy. You sip the wine. It burns, but cleanly. I've sat with generals, merchants, bishops, she continues. They all think they're the ones in control, but give a man pleasure, give him praise, and he'll tell you what even torture couldn't pry loose. You ask if the Empire knows what they're doing. She laughs. The Empire needs us. And here's your fringe fact. There are suggestions, mostly from marginal court writings and monastic grumblings, that the Emperor's own spies occasionally recruited women from elite brothels to act as intelligence gatherers. Not officially. Of course, nothing written, but the pattern is there. Leaked policies, scandalous exposures, somehow always at just the right moment. You ask her if she's ever passed information that changed the course of something important. Her gaze sharpens. You're asking the wrong question. She leans forward, voice lower now. The question is, how many wars haven't happened because of what we've said? That lands like stone in water. You sit in the silence that follows. The music in the next room has shifted, slower, darker. Maybe you're imagining it, but you think you hear someone crying. You ask her name. Call me Asenath, she says. It's not the one I was born with, but it's the one that works. You stand, thank her as she doesn't rise, just watches you. As you turn to leave, she says one last thing. If you write about us, write the truth. Not just the filth, write about the power, even if it scares you. You nod. Outside, the wind has picked up. You brace against it, cloak flapping. The sea groans behind you. You look back at the building, quiet, anonymous, a shadow with silk curtains. You think about all the history books that mention generals and emperors, bishops and saints, but never the women who knew what they muttered in bed, who they feared, what secrets made them sweat. You think about Asenath and her knives made of words, and here's the scholarly debate. Were elite courtesans simply pawns, victims in fine robes, or were they wielding influence the Empire never dared to name? Some argue they were exploited, nothing more than puppets in perfume. Others suggest they were among the sharpest players in Constantinople's endless chessboard, walking a line between danger and dominion. As you pass the harbour again, you see another ship arriving. The torchlight glints off its hull. Another girl steps off the ramp, eyes wide, jaw tight. You wonder what name she'll be given, what secrets she'll be taught to keep. Or leak, and whether she'll survive long enough to tell anyone her story. The city reeks of boiled onions and perfume today. It's an odd pairing, and it follows you through the crowded streets like a rumour, sour and sweet, impossible to ignore. You pass a woman scrubbing stone steps with vinegar, a man coughing blood into a handkerchief, and 2 girls arguing over the cost of a single fig. Life rolls forward in Constantinople no matter who's buried beneath it. But you've started to look at people differently now, not just for what they do, but what they carry. And some, it turns out, carry more than sin. You head toward the public bathhouses, the Balanaya. Most people in the city come here at least once a week, some every day. It's not just for cleanliness, it's social, ritualistic, a place to gossip, negotiate, confess without consequence, but also sometimes a place to die slowly, and nobody notices until it's too late. You slip through the painted archway of the largest bathhouse in the South Quarter. It's beautiful, at least on the surface. Tiled floors still clinging to patterns of dolphins and nymphs. Steam rising like the breath of old gods. You smell oils, rosewater, and something subtler beneath it, rot. Not the stink of unwashed bodies, something deeper, something alive. Inside, people wander half-naked through the mist, wrapped in linen, skin glistening. You see young boys pouring water into basins, and older men discussing law in whispers. and women in their own wing laughing too loudly to mean it. But it's the quiet ones you're watching, the pale, the thin, the ones who scratch at their arms when they think no one is looking. You speak to a healer, an older man with a crooked back and eyes yellowed by age. His name is Matthias. He says he's been working the baths for 20 years, says he's seen more skin than sin, but today, when you ask him about the women from the brothels, his face changes. "They come here," he says. "They always come here, sometimes to bathe, sometimes to die." You ask him what he means. He shrugs, motions you toward a narrow doorway in the rear of the bathhouse. You follow. The room is small, dim. A sick bay, if it can even be called that. A row of mats, a few chipped jars of salve, and the faint, unmistakable stench of infection. One woman lies on her side, moaning softly. Another stares at the ceiling, unmoving. Her breath comes in shallow, uneven pulls. "They don't get treatment in the brothels," Matthias mutters. "Costs too much, and the madams don't like losing coin to a doctor." You kneel beside the motionless woman. Her arms are covered in lesions, her lips are cracked, her eyes barely move when you speak. "She's been like that 3 days, Matthias says. "We think it's syphilis, or something worse, doesn't matter. No one's coming for her." Here's your historical fact for today. Though Byzantine medicine was surprisingly advanced for its time, rooted in Greek, Roman and Arabic traditions, sexually transmitted diseases were poorly understood, poorly treated, and almost always stigmatized. Women from brothels had little access to formal care. They were either left to fend for themselves or brought in secret to places like this to die out of sight. You sit back, stunned by the quiet of the room. It doesn't feel like a place of healing. It feels like a waiting room for the forgotten. Matthias continues. "I've seen diseases eat women alive, flesh rot off bone, fever that won't quit. You know what spreads it? The rich. They pass it from house to house, girl to girl. Then they come here and wash it off in rosewater, like that makes it holy. You ask if anyone's trying to stop it. He scoffs. No, they just blame the women. Always the women." And here's your fringe fact. In the Byzantine imagination, disease, especially one tied to sex, was not just a physical affliction. It was considered spiritual punishment. Some preachers claimed syphilitic lesions were marks of sin left by God. Others encouraged the sick to cleanse their souls rather than their bodies. The result, more prayer, less medicine. You ask Matthias why he stays. He looks at the woman on the mat, the one who hasn't moved. Because someone should. You leave him to his vigil and wander back through the steamy maze of the baths. The laughter in the main room feels louder now, hollow, a mask. Later you find yourself near the Church of Saints Cosmas and Damianos, patron saints of physicians, fitting. Inside, the floor glows gold with candlelight. You see a man kneeling before the icon, praying feverishly. His hands are red and shaking. When he stands, you see his robe, embroidered, expensive, not a priest, a patron. One of the wealthier ones. He leaves. You follow. He slips down a side street into a modest home behind a bakery. A girl opens the door. You recognize her from the bathhouse. She smiled there, faintly, when you walked past. Now she just looks tired. He enters. The door closes. And here's the scholarly debate. Did the spread of disease in Byzantine brothels serve as a silent form of regulation, an unspoken deterrent, or was it merely another example of systemic neglect? Some argue that the empire's failure to treat its sex workers was strategic, a way of keeping them isolated. Others say it was simply indifference masked as moral superiority. You think of the woman on the mat again, of her shin, of her eyes, of how no one asked her name when she arrived. That night, you pass a fountain where children play with sticks. One drops his toy into the water and cries. His mother picks it up, kisses his hand, tells him he's brave. You wonder if anyone ever told the women in the sick room that. You doubt it. You start paying closer attention to the walls, not the grand, frescoed interiors of churches or the majestic city fortifications, no, the smaller ones. The walls of winehouses, bathhouses, brothels, the way they seem to hold their breath whenever someone powerful walks past. You begin to notice how often the laughter inside these places stops just before a senator enters, or how suddenly a room empties when a high-ranking cleric is rumoured to be nearby. The walls in Constantinople don't just have ears, they have memories. You're in the Lausos quarter today, just off the Mies, where the elite live close enough to the common people to feel superior, but far enough that their sins can travel discreetly. The houses here are large but walled off, guarded but not with soldiers, no, with secrets. Each mansion hides an ecosystem of its own, courtyards, kitchens, servants, and in some cases side doors that open only after sunset. You follow one such door, a boy, 16 at most, eyes darting like sparrows, slips inside with a wrapped parcel. Moments later a man exits, middle-aged, finely dressed, moving quickly. You recognise him, a retired general. He gave a speech in the Senate just last week, condemning moral decay and urging the emperor to restore the purity of the capital. You trail him down the avenue. He doesn't look back. He vanishes into a building that doesn't advertise itself, but you already know what it is. Inside, you're met with velvet. Not silk. Velvet. Thick, lush, sound-dampening. The lighting is low, scented with myrrh and burning citrus. You hear voices, low and careful. This is a house of discretion, a curated brothel, one where no girl raises her voice and no client leaves without a smile and a carefully sealed mouth. A man greets you. Polite. Professional. He introduces himself as Leontios. You tell him you're not here for services. Of course you're not, he says, smiling. You're here for stories. You ask if he's ever had any clients of rank. All of them, he says. He guides you to a small salon, offers wine you decline, then gestures to a tapestry on the wall. It's of Orpheus charming the animals with his lyre. We call this the menagerie, he says, because all kinds come through here. Senators, bishops, scholars. They say they seek comfort, but most come to talk, to unload what their wives and confessors won't hear. You ask if anyone listens. He smiles. Of course. And here's your historical fact. While officially Byzantine society operated under strict moral codes, in practice, brothels often became hubs for elite men to speak freely, about politics, about rivals, about plans better left undocumented. These confessions weren't always whispered in private rooms. Often, they were laid bare in drunken monologues to the very women they'd never admit to knowing in daylight. Leontios continues, "There's a girl here, Thalia. She has the face of a saint and the ears of a librarian. She could tell you which generals plan which campaigns just by remembering whose boots are dusty, whose hands tremble when they talk on ships. You ask if he sells these secrets. Not often, he says. Only when it matters. You press him. Matters to whom? He leans forward. The Empire. And here's your fringe fact. There are scattered references in Byzantine chronicles, often vague, often retracted, that some brothels became tools of statecraft, that messages were passed through lovers, that blackmail was currency, that the things whispered in pleasure became daggers drawn in court. Leontios shows you a ring he keeps hidden beneath a panel in the floor, a senator's seal. You don't ask how he got it, you both know the answer already. You think men fear sin? He asks. They don't. They fear exposure. He escorts you out shortly after. As you step into the street, he gives you one final gift. There's a girl named Fotine, he says. She served in the palace. Now she's here. If you want a story that'll ruin your sleep, find her. You do. It takes time. 3 hours, 2 more wrong doors, 1 bribe. But you find her sitting on the edge of a rooftop garden behind the brothel, smoking something in a pipe carved with lions. You're the one asking about secret, she says before you introduce yourself. You nod. I kept them, she says, for years. Held them in my mouth like poison. Now I spit them out just to see who flinches. She tells you about a bishop who cried during every visit. He said he wasn't sinning because I wasn't real, that I was a test, that if he resisted, God would reward him. She tells you about a general who begged her to tie him down and say things his enemies might. He said it helped him prepare for defeat. She tells you about the emperor's cousin, no name, no title, who used to talk about foreign gold and quiet poisonings while stroking her hair. He said I was his judgment room, that he only spoke his truth when he was naked. And then she says this, the walls remember more than the saints. Here's your scholarly debate. Did the upper echelons of Byzantine society genuinely believe they could separate their spiritual and political lives from their indulgences? Or did they know, deep down, that these walls were witnesses to their undoing? Some argue these contradictions were deliberate, rituals of release. Others say it was blindness, pure and simple. You walk home past the forum, where a crowd gathers to hear a magistrate condemn moral decay for the 3rd time this week. He gestures. He shouts. People nod. You wonder if he's ever been to the menagerie. You wonder what he whispers when the lights are low. You wonder who's listening. You haven't seen the Silk Road, but its ghost wanders these streets. Every bolt of fabric fluttering from a vendor's stall, every saffron-dusted fig wrapped in muslin, every carved ivory trinket passed from one rich hand to another. It all hums with distance. Constantinople doesn't just feed on the empire, it swallows the world, and among the perfumes, spices and rare stones, there's something else moving along those trade winds. Flesh, sometimes draped in silk, sometimes stitched into it. You begin your morning in the textile quarter, near the Constantinople harbour. Yeah, the air smells like dye and sweat and the vinegar they use to fix colour into cloth. It seeps into everything, your tunic, your skin, your lungs. The streets here are tight, pulsing with men hauling bales on their backs, women spinning thread through calloused fingers, and children darting between looms like rats in a garden maze. At first glance, it's all business. Commerce, guilds and ledgers, but you've been watching too long now to be fooled. You know the signs. The girl whose scarf is a little too sheer. The man who haggles just long enough to confirm he's not here for the silk at all. The shopkeeper who locks eyes with a passing eunuch and gives the barest nod. You follow him, not the eunuch, the buyer. He leads you to a second-story room above a dye shop where the smell of crushed indigo nearly chokes the doorway. Inside, curtains, privacy mirrors, women dressed not in street rags but in robes stitched with patterns that mean something to the men who pay to see them. One wears a robe sewn with peacock feathers, another golden thread woven into the shape of a hunting falcon. You ask the woman in charge, her name is Damaris, what this place is. A showroom, she says with a smile that doesn't reach her eyes, but not for cloth. She tells you the girls here are for sale, not rented, purchased, sometimes by merchants, sometimes by visiting nobles, occasionally by foreign dignitaries who don't speak the language but know how to gesture. These aren't just prostitutes, Damaris says. They're gifts, trophies, wrapped in silk and sent to men who measure their power by how many women they've had to kneel for them. You ask where the girls come from. Everywhere, she says. The provinces, the borderlands, the mountains. Some arrive with merchants hidden in wagons beneath bolts of linen. Others are bought en route. We've had girls from Antioch, from Armenia, from as far east as the Caspian. And here's your historical fact. The Byzantine Empire sat at the crossroads of global trade, and with that position came a disturbing byproduct, human trafficking. Though often undocumented in official records, evidence suggests that women and children were moved along trade routes like any other commodity, from east to west, from pagan territories to Christian strongholds, sometimes under the guise of servitude, sometimes as war booty, and sometimes, quite plainly, as property. Damaris leads you to a small back room, and there she shows you something that makes your stomach tighten. A ledger. Not just names and ages, but origin points, languages spoken, price paid, and destination. One girl is marked Silk House Thessalonike, another Gift for Persian Envoy. Several lines are scratched out, replaced with a single Greek word, Apollolea, lost. You ask her what that means. She died, Damaris says simply, or vanished, or wasn't wanted. You ask how she lives with it. She leans against the doorway. These girls were never going to be free, not in this world. I make sure they're clean, fed, protected from the worst of it. That's more than most can say. You ask if they know what they are. Damaris looks at you long and hard and there. They're not stupid, she says, but hope dies slowly, and silk makes a beautiful shroud. You leave with the image of that ledger burned into your brain. You walk down streets that suddenly feel narrower, past shops displaying robes that took 3 lives to stitch scorch, past banners dyed red with beetle's blood, fluttering like they don't know what they cost. At the edge of the textile market, you find a girl no older than 14 seated by a vat of dye, her arms stained purple to the elbows. She doesn't look at you, just keeps stirring, 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 like if she stops, she'll vanish. Later you visit the docks, watching ships unload crates marked with foreign scripts. A man in a linen robe negotiates with a sailor over a crate labelled Wool and Women. No one bats an eye. And here's your fringe fact. Some shipments from Eastern territories were accompanied by women gifted as diplomatic tokens. Concubines trained in dance, music, language. They were dressed in the finest fabrics, not because they were valued as people, but because they were extensions of the empires that sent them. A living emblem of wealth. And yes, often these women were prostituted upon arrival, regardless of how they were introduced. You find one of them in a garden behind a merchant house near the Augustaion. Her name is Hestia now, but she was called Tavisha in her homeland. She tells you she was promised to a lord trained for 2 years in song and posture, but once delivered, she was passed off to his steward and redistributed. She says this with no emotion. You ask her what she wants. I want to know if my name is still written in my mother's house, she says. Then she turns away. And here's the scholarly debate. Were these women considered slaves, courtesans, or something in between? The lines blur. Some argue they held influence, that their training made them powerful. Others contend that their agency was a myth, that every silk robe they wore was stitched from silence and submission. You pass another shop as the sun begins to set. In the window, a gown of green silk. Embroidered with gold, it's beautiful. It catches the light just so. You imagine how many hands touched it, how many stories it hides. You keep walking, and behind you the silk road winds on, paved not just with spice and silver, but with footsteps no one bothered to follow. You don't remember when you stopped calling them by their names. Not deliberately, but somewhere along the road the women became them. The girls, the workers, the bodies behind the curtains. It's easier that way, isn't it? Clean, general, not as hard on the conscience. But today that changes, because today you meet someone who's never quite belonged in any of those boxes. Someone who bends the rules, flips the script, and refuses to settle into the shape the empire demands. Her name is Narcia. You find her in the Castron Quarter, a district where tailors work next to fortune tellers and wine shops buzz with laughter even at midday. You're following a rumour, nothing more than a phrase passed in a bathhouse. The girl with the boy's voice who's smarter than any magistrate. You heard it twice. That's enough. Narcia lives above a spice vendor in a room with curtains instead of doors and incense instead of locks. When you step in, she's seated cross-legged on a faded carpet, grinding clothes with a small stone pestle. Her eyes lift, and for a moment, you're unsure who you're looking at. Her features are soft, but precise. Strong cheekbones, full lips, a jaw that might once have belonged to someone called Nikos. Or maybe not. You're the one asking about the Empire's dirt, she says, voice low and smooth, like honey mixed with smoke. Took you long enough. You blink. She smiles. Yes, she says, I'm that Narcia. You ask what that means. It means, she says, I'm what happens when someone refuses to die quietly in the wrong skin. And just like that, you realise that every assumption you brought with you is going to be useless here. She tells you she was born a boy, sold as a servant, worked as a scribe's apprentice, and when her master took her to a brothel for experience, she found something else entirely. They called me exotic, she says, not hiding the sarcasm. They said my face was too pretty to waste on scrolls. I realised I could either die one piece at a time or become something they didn't expect, but so she did. She started dressing differently, speaking differently. She took the name Narcia from a line in a play she heard once. She was a goddess disguised as a maid, she says. I figured, why not? At first, the brothel where she worked laughed. Then they listened. I made them money, she says. And more than that, I kept secrets. Because here's your historical fact today. While not widely documented in official texts, gender variance did exist in the Byzantine world, though usually wrapped in layers of religious condemnation or medical misunderstanding. Individuals who lived outside expected gender roles were often forced into isolation, exploited, or mythologized. But some, like Narcia, found ways to navigate the system, especially in the margins, where law blurred into survival. Narcia wasn't just a worker. She became a source, men trusted her, thought she was entertainment, a curiosity. And like many who underestimate what they don't understand, they talk too much. I learned how to extract information, she says, not through force or through fascination. They wanted to impress me, confess to me, own me. I let them believe they did. You ask her if she ever used what she learned. All the time, she says. You don't survive in this city without leverage. She pours you a drink, citrus, honey, a hint of something peppery. You sip. It tastes like summer in a glass. I once knew a bishop who begged me to whip him and call him a fraud, she says with a smirk. He cried after. Not from pain, from relief. You ask her if she sees herself as a courtesan or a spy. She laughs. I'm a mirror, she says. People see what they want, and I survive by reflecting it. You look around her room. There are no icons, no relics, but in the corner you spot a small statue of Hermaphroditus, half male, half female. It's dusty, revered in its own quiet way. You know what the Empire fears most, she asks. Not sin, not sex, ambiguity. And here's your fringe fact. While Byzantine theology clung tightly to binary ideas of gender and virtue, folklore and fringe philosophy preserved stories of people who lived in between, saints rumoured to be born in the wrong bodies, or travellers from the East who taught that gender was a spectrum. These stories were tolerated in hushed circles, ridiculed in public, and carefully erased from official records. Narcia keeps a small collection of these tales. She shows you one, a scroll written in faded ink, the Greek barely legible. It's about a prophet who disguised herself as a man to preach, she says. They killed her when they found out, then canonized her. You ask if she believes anything anymore. Faith, justice, even hope. She leans back against the wall, folds her hands. I believe in survival, she says, and in the people the Empire keeps trying to erase. You thank her. She nods. Don't write me as a tragedy, she says before you go. I'm not a lesson, I'm a witness. You leave her there, grinding cloves in her windowless room, wrapped in silk and mystery, lit from within by a fire the city doesn't have a name for. Outside, the market pulses with sound, bells, shouting, the call of a flute somewhere nearby. You walk past a butcher's stall and see a priest blessing a string of sausages. You pass two young girls carrying a bolt of crimson cloth, one side dragging in the dust. You pass a young man staring too long at his reflection in a shop window, and you wonder what stories he's carrying. Here's your scholarly debate. Was Byzantine society entirely closed to gender variance, or were there unspoken spaces where those who lived outside the binary could exist, even thrive? Most argue the former, pointing to laws, sermons, punishments, but a growing body of scholars believes in the power of the in-between. In the spaces where outcasts didn't just survive, they rewrote the rules. You think of Narcia, not broken, not confused, just unashamed. And you walk on, the scent of cloves clinging to your sleeve. You can tell when a house used to be something else. The stones remember. The thresholds sag under the wrong weight. The windows look inward instead of out. This one, tucked behind a weaver's shop in the Chalca district, was probably a family home once, maybe a merchant's. You can still see traces of it. The carved arch above the door, the faint outline of where a child might have scratched something into the plaster. Now the building is quieter. Too quiet. There's no laughter inside, no movement. Just a low creak every so often, like someone leaning gently on a coffin lid. You've heard whispers of this place. They call it the still house, not because nothing happens inside, but because nothing escapes. No names, no criers, no memories. It's not a brothel in the usual sense, it's a destination, a final one for some, and the girls sent here. They're not new, they're not foreign, they're not even alive in the sense people usually mean it. You knock. The door opens an inch. A woman's voice says nothing. You wait. Eventually the door swings wider and she lets you in. Her name is Iulia. She used to be a nursemaid, then a laundress, then something else. Now she runs the still house. She doesn't wear makeup or jewellery. She doesn't speak in riddles or smiles. She just watches you with a face that forgot how to soften. You ask what this place is, she says, it's where they send the used ones. The hallway is dim, not from lack of candles, but because the windows are shuttered from the inside. You hear movement in another room, soft steps, like someone pacing barefoot. A whisper of cloth, a sigh that could be sleep or pain. Iulia leads you to a sitting room. Plain, dust in the corners, 2 chairs. She doesn't offer wine, just sits. You ask who comes here. She shrugs. No one who wants to be seen. You ask why the girls are sent here. They were too old, too sick, too quiet, or too loud. Sometimes they tried to run, sometimes they just stopped trying. And here's your historical fact. Though Byzantine brothels were theoretically regulated, licensed, taxed, and monitored, the system often discarded women who could no longer turn profit. No pension, no release. Those with nowhere to go were either turned out to the streets, locked away in religious institutions, or quietly shuffled into private houses like this, where they could be used without being seen. You hear footsteps overhead, not heavy, just tired, like someone trying not to wake themselves up. Ligeia says the stillhouse operates on donations, wealthy patrons who don't want the city to see what they've broken. They fund it as a kindness or a form of penance. They visit sometimes, she says, not to sleep with the girls, just to look at them, remind themselves what mercy looks like. You ask to meet one. She hesitates. Finally, she brings you to a small room at the end of a narrow hall. Inside, a woman sits on a cushion near a window. She's not young, maybe 30, maybe older, it's hard to tell. Her skin is pale, her hair uneven. Her hands rest in her lap like they've forgotten how to reach for anything. Her name, Ligeia says, is Eudoxia. She doesn't look at you. You sit anyway. You ask how long she's been here. She speaks without turning. 7 months, or years, time is soft here. You ask why she was sent. I broke a client's nose, she says. He asked for pain and I gave it to him. You ask if she regrets it. No. And here's your fringe fact. While Byzantine law occasionally allowed women to report abuse, even within the brothel system, those protections rarely extended to sex workers. In practice, striking a client, no matter the reason, meant punishment, beatings, exile, or, in cases like Eudoxia's, silent relocation. You ask if she wants to leave. She finally turns her head, meets your gaze. Her eyes are sharp, but not angry. There's nothing out there for me, she says. Here, I have a room, a chair, a name. You ask if she ever dreams. She smiles barely. Once, I dreamed I was a baker, had flour on my arms, burned my palms on hot stones. It felt like mine. You ask what she dreams now. I don't, she says. The silence after that is heavy. You thank her and she nods once, already turning away before you've finished speaking. On your way out, Ligeia tells you some of the girls recover. Sometimes they remember how to laugh. Sometimes they learn to read. We teach them small things. It helps. You ask if any have ever left. One, she says. She became a nun, or so I'm told. And here's the scholarly debate. Were these quiet houses forms of charity, punishment, or simply disposal? Historians disagree. Some argue they were acts of kindness, giving women shelter when in the streets would offer only death. Others say they were more insidious. Prisons dressed as sanctuaries, tools for clients and owners to wash their hands clean without facing judgment. You step back into the street, blinking in the daylight. The stillhouse fades behind you like a forgotten word. A man walks past carrying a rooster under one arm. A child tugs on his robe asking for bread. 2 monks argue softly over a verse, and you, still holding the weight of what you just saw, realise something. Some of the Empire's worst crimes don't happen in alleys or back rooms. They happen in silence, in places no one talks about. Places where nothing screams and no one listens. The kind of places where women go not to die, but to be slowly, carefully erased. You wake to the sound of bells, not the deep, holy kind that roll from church towers, but small ones, tinny, frantic, tied to the waist of a woman selling roasted chestnuts in the market. Each step she takes rings out like a warning or a dare. It reminds you that the city never truly sleeps, not even for sin, especially not for sin. You're in the Cymothea district now, the southern slope of the city, where the streets curve like questions and the shadows move faster than the sun. This is where the sailors live when they don't want to be found, where foreign priests come to forget their vows, where a brothel can wear the skin of a tavern, a church, or even a school. This morning you're here to investigate one of the quietest myths of all, the religious brothel. The phrase sounds ridiculous at first. You almost laughed when you heard it. But the source was too serious, too broken around the edges to be lying. A former acolyte, pale as linen, gripping a candle like it was the only thing anchoring him to the earth, he'd said, they called it sanctuary, but it was never that. So you start at a small chapel off a side alley. It's a single dome, cracked with age, no tower, no bells. The sign above the door says House of St. Kyriaki. Inside there's incense, but no icons. Candles, but no flame. It's silent in a way that feels theatrical, like silence rehearsed until perfect. A woman greets you. She wears a veil, but it's not the veil of a nun. It's sheer, gauzy, delicate as spider silk. She calls herself Ligeia. You say you're here to pray. She says, "Of course you are, we all are." She leads you to a side chamber, and that's when the illusion begins to crumble. The floor is polished, yes, but not with reverence, with wine. There are no pews, only cushions, and on the walls, no saints, just tapestries, depicting not crucifixions or miracles, but bodies, draped, twisted, consenting maybe, maybe not. You ask her how long the chapel's been here. 100 years, she says, maybe more. We don't keep time like they do in Hagia Sophia. We keep time by clients. You ask what that means. Some come weekly, some monthly, some only during Lent when guilt is sweet. And here's your historical fact. Despite the empire's Christian core, there are records, oblique, begrudging, sometimes even censored, that suggest religious buildings were occasionally used as fronts for illicit activities, including prostitution. Especially in fringe districts or economically desperate quarters, a small chapel might double as a house of vice, cloaked in sacred symbols to avoid scrutiny. Lydia sits you down on a cushion, offers you something in a silver cup. You decline. She tilts her head. You don't have to pretend you're better. Everyone here wears two faces. You ask her if the church knows. Oh, they know, she says. Some of them even visit. We call them the midnight bishops. They pray with their hands. She tells you about one, a scholar from the imperial court. He paid extra to recite psalms while he undressed the girls. Claimed it made him feel closer to God. Once, she says, he made us hold candles. Said he wanted to see sin in the right light. You ask how she justifies it. She smiles sadly. There is no justification, only function. And here's your fringe fact. Komaha. Some early Christian sects believed that physical acts, no matter how scandalous, could be sacred if performed with proper intent. Most of these groups were labelled heretical and stamped out. But ideas are hard to kill, and in places like Samarthia, where theology and survival blur, a few fragments may have endured. You ask her how many girls work here. 7, she says, including me. All of us once believed in something. You ask if they still do. She's quiet for a long time. Finally she says, I believe that confession doesn't require truth, only performance. You ask her if she'd ever leave. There's nowhere to go, she says. Here, at least I'm part of a ritual. Outside, I'm just a stain. You step outside again. The false chapel disappearing behind you like a dream too strange to hold. You pass a beggar with a censer, winging it wildly, chanting nonsense that sounds almost holy. Child tries to mimic him, giggling. An old man throws a coin, maybe in pity, maybe in prayer. And you think about Lydia, her veil, her bitter wine, her altar of survival. You walk north, back toward the edge of the Mies. There, near a fountain, dedicated to a forgotten saint, you meet a real priest, or at least, a man dressed like one. You tell him what you saw. He sighs. They exist, he says, but we pretend they don't, because to clean them would mean admitting they were ever part of us. You ask him if that chapel was once truly sacred. All places are sacred, he says, until we walk in. And here's your scholarly debate. Did the religious brothel exist as a subversive myth, a metaphor for ecclesiastical corruption, or was it real, hidden in plain sight, allowed to function in the cracks of the city's morality? Scholars divide. Some insist it's a slander, a heretical fantasy invented by anti-clerical voices. Others point to the language of old sermons, the phrasing of ancient laws, the architecture of certain private chapels, and say, look closer. You do, and what you see is this. A girl holding a candle, eyes closed, murmuring scripture as hands close around her waist. A bishop lighting incense to mask the smell of sweat. A prayer that starts with Lord forgive me and ends in silence. Is the sound that draws you in tonight, metal on stone, rhythmic, sharp, like someone dragging a blade across the street. You follow it past the fishmongers who've already doused their stalls for the day, past the wine-soaked corners where drunks sing old imperial hymns in wrong keys. The city is winding down, but the wrong parts of it are always waking up. You find the source of the sound in the narrow bend of a forgotten alley, where a woman squats on a broken step, sharpening a knife. She doesn't flinch when you approach, doesn't stop working, just says, "You've been following ghosts." You ask if she means the brothels. She glances up, Her eyes are grey, flat, no pretense in them. I mean the women you keep writing about like they're already gone. Her name is Cassiane. You learn quickly that she's not like the others. She doesn't work for a madam. She doesn't wait for clients. She doesn't perform. She operates her own space, a squat rectangular room carved from a once warehouse, now crumbling at the edges. No mirrors, no incense, no wine. You want a body, she says. You pay. You want power games, you leave. You ask her why she set up alone. Because I got tired of being someone's debt. And here's your historical fact. While the majority of Byzantine sex work operated under tight systems of control, madams, brothel guilds or shadowy sponsors, there were known instances of independent sex workers, particularly in port districts or fringe communities. These women existed outside the law's protection, but also beyond its leash. They paid no brothel tax, refused registration, and often lived dangerous but self-determined lives. Cassiane lights a single oil lamp and motions for you to sit on a crate across from her. You do. The room is cool, stone-walled, and smells like ash and salt. I'm not here for your pity, she says. I'm not broken. I'm not a metaphor. I've killed men who tried to make me one. You ask if she's ever feared for her life. Every night, she says. But fear keeps you sharp. You lose it. You die. She shows you a scar running across her ribs. He thought he could own me. I sent him back to his wife with a mouth full of teeth and no memory. You ask how many others she's hurt. She shrugs. Enough to have peace. And here's your fringe fact. In some pockets of the empire, particularly in the lower quarters of Constantinople, sex workers formed informal alliances for protection, sharing safe houses, pooling coin for weapons, or posting lookouts during busy hours. These were not organised in the traditional guild sense, but they served as a form of community justice. If a man hurt one woman, he answered to all of them. Cassiane has no illusions about what she does. She calls herself what the others won't, a whore. It's just a word, she says. They make it dirty. I make it profitable. You ask her for if she ever wanted something else. She nods. Of course. I wanted to be a shipwright. My father was one. Taught me how to plane wood and read wind. But then he died. And my mother sold our tools for wine. After that, dreams cost too much. She pulls out a small wooden carving from under her seat, a ship's bow, notched and detailed. I still remember the shape of sails, she says, but no one pays a girl to build anything. You tell her she's built something here, that surviving outside the system is no small feat. She smirks. It's not survival, it's resistance. He tells you about a woman named Ligeia who used to work with her. The two of them ran Jobbies out of the harbour for a year. She was the best I ever saw at reading men. Knew who'd pay, knew who'd bleed. You ask what happened. Cassiane doesn't answer at first, just sharpens her knife a little longer. She got soft, she finally says. Let a client convince her he loved her. Promised her passage to Nicaea. She got on that boat and vanished. You ask if she thinks Ligeia's dead. She's worse than dead, Cassiane says. She believed him. And here's your scholarly debate. Do women like Cassiane represent true independence within the Byzantine world? Or are they simply another variation of entrapment, a myth of autonomy in a system rigged to consume them? Some argue they symbolise proto-agency, figures of strength and self-possession in a time of oppression. Others say they're still bound, if not by law then by circumstance, violence, and the weight of being born into a world that only values female silence or obedience. You ask Cassiane if she ever thinks of leaving Constantinople. She laughs, a full, deep sound. There's nowhere else to go, she says. This city's the only thing big enough to forget who I was. She walks you out, past the crate where she keeps her tools. Before you leave, she offers you a warning. If you write about us, she says, don't make us into saints or sinners, just make us real. You promise. She nods once, then disappears into the alley. The night air is heavy with mist now. The lanterns burn low. You walk past sleeping dogs, silent doorways, and an old man muttering names under his breath like he's calling ghosts home. You think of Cassiane's hands, scarred but steady. The carving of the ship, the smell of salt that eats, and you realise something. Some women in this city don't need saving. They need remembering. The rain comes suddenly, with no warning and no mercy. One moment the streets are dry and buzzing with midday commerce. As next they're drowning in silver sheets of water, slapping against tile roofs. trickling down alley gutters, swallowing voices. You duck beneath the eaves of a meat vendor's awning, already half soaked, and watch as the city's skin turns slick and shivering. It's a cleansing sort of storm, or at least that's what it wants you to believe. But the things that stain this city don't wash away, especially not what's buried under the Hippodrome. You've avoided it until now, the grandest of the public spaces, the thunderous theatre of sport, politics, riots and rumours, the place where emperors have bled and charioteers have become gods. But beneath its opulence, the Hippodrome has a rot. You've heard the whispers, that after hours, when the games are done and the laughter fades, other performances begin. You cross the slick plaza just as the last spectators clear out from a political procession. Some senator's son standing on a makeshift stage, shouting about public morality while servants scrub graffiti from the columns behind him. As the rain softens to a mist, you slip through a side arch past the stone lions and rusting chains, and find yourself in one of the many substructures beneath the Hippodrome. This part of the city doesn't appear on maps. It's a series of tunnels, corridors and former stables long since repurposed. Some say it was once used to house exotic animals, others say prisoners. But these days it's used for something stranger, something crueler. You're guided by a man named Pothos, which means longing in Greek, though he wears the name like a joke. He doesn't smile, just walks with a limp and smells faintly of sweat and rosewater, like someone trying to mask what clings too close to the skin. He leads you down a corridor lit by torches set too low. The air is thick with damp stone and something else, spice maybe, or the residue of panic. You hear it before you see it. Music. Slow, foreign, played on strings that vibrate like nerves. Then the laughter. Male, loud, bored. The clink of coin, the crack of a whip. You arrive at a doorway carved with horse motifs, mostly worn down. Beyond it, a chamber, low-ceilinged and tight like a cave pretending to be a banquet hall. Cushions line the floor, oil lamps flicker in sconces, and at the centre of the room, raised on a small wooden platform, two women are dancing. Not joyfully, not seductively, just mechanically. One moves like her joints ache, the other never looks up. But around them sit 6 men, 2 in senatorial robes, 1 in a military cloak, and the rest in civilian garb, too clean for real labour. They cheer, they place wagers not on the dancers, but on what they'll do next. You realise quickly that this is their betting house. But not for games of chance, for humiliation. And here's your historical fact. Private chambers beneath major public venues like the Hippodrome were often repurposed for unofficial entertainments. Some housed political prisoners, others became dens for gambling, underground theatre, or unlicensed brothels. The proximities to power made them easiest to protect and difficult to regulate, and the powerful knew it. Pothos leans close. They call this the menagerie. You ask why. He gestures toward the wall. There, behind a wooden lattice, you see them. Women, girls, maybe 10, maybe more, packed into a space no wider than a stable. Each one marked, some with bracelets, others with coloured veils. They wait like performers backstage waiting for their cue. They're not owned by the state, Pothos says. They're owned by favours, debts, the kind that can't be written down. You ask how they get here. Some are bought, some are borrowed, some are stolen, but only briefly, long enough to entertain the right man on the right night. You see one girl reach out to touch the bars, another slaps her hand away, murmuring something you can't hear. And here's your fringe fact. There are rare but persistent mentions of borrowed women in certain late Byzantine legal petitions, women whose names appear once in connection with an event or noble household, then vanish from all other records. Some scholars believe these were women temporarily leased or trafficked into elite private functions, only to be discarded or erased after. You look back at the platform. One of the men claps his hands, and a third woman is brought out. This one wears a mask, not for mystery, for anonymity. Maybe she was someone once. Maybe she still is. The man to your left laughs. She used to be a priest's niece. Took her 2 years to break. Now she dances like a dog. You ask Pothos how often this happens. Weekly, he says, or whenever someone important wants to forget who they are. You ask if the Emperor knows. He scoffs. He knows everything. He just pretends the Hippodrome is still about chariots. You want to leave, but you force yourself to stay a little longer. Long enough to see how the bets are made. Long enough to watch the man in the military cloak offer a jewel-studded brooch for just a kiss. Long enough to hear one of the girls whimper. Not loudly, just enough. And here's the scholarly debate. Were places like the menagerie exceptions, aberrations of a decaying empire, or were they symptoms of something deeper, more systemic? Some argue they were the final excesses of a society collapsing under its own contradictions. Others insist they were always there, just hidden better when the city still pretended to care. When you leave, you don't take the main road. You slip out through a servant's exit, up a spiral stair, back into the light drizzle of early evening. The city blinks around you like nothing's happened. Children chase each other near a baker's stall. A blind musician plays a song no one knows the words to. And far above, the Emperor's palace gleams like it's never held a single secret. You remember the girl with the mask. You remember how still her hands were, like they'd forgotten what freedom felt like. And you realise the worst part of the menagerie isn't the cruelty, it's the applause. You start your morning with silence, not the kind wrapped in prayer or sleep, but the other kind, the one that comes after too much noise. Your head feels full of echoes, of clapping, of laughter that didn't sound like joy, of footsteps dragging along stone floors. You try to write, but your fingers stall, try to speak, but your voice gets stuck behind your teeth. You walk instead, north toward the old Theodosian walls, past the meat market with its glistening entrails and iron hooks, past a crippled man preaching to nobody in particular about the sins of glass windows, past a statue of a lion that's missing one paw and looks more annoyed about it than maimed. The wind picks up as you go, cold and dry and spitting dust into your eyes. The city is changing again, damn, the way it always does between centuries, between emperors, between storms. You come to a small graveyard just beyond the city gates, one of those informal ones that aren't really on any map, filled with cracked stones and names half lost to erosion. No frescoes, no icons, just dirt and fragments and scattered here and there offerings, dried herbs, coins, little cloth dolls. You walk between the markers, reading what you can, guessing what you can't. The graves aren't arranged in any real order. You realise they were probably buried quickly, quietly, maybe not even illegally. A woman sits near the far wall wrapped in a threadbare shawl, feeding breadcrumbs to a pair of mangy pigeons. She doesn't look up when you approach. You greet her anyway. She nods once. You ask her who's buried here. Everyone who wasn't supposed to be remembered, she says. She gestures around her. Some of them were whores, others were thieves, some were just poor. A few were children that never got names. You ask who she is. No one, she says. But I used to be called Diane. You sit with her for a while. She speaks in fragments, as though her words are rationed. You learn that she once worked in the Ferris Quarter, in a brothel that burned down after a jealous client tried to kill the woman who wouldn't love him back. He killed himself too, she says, almost amused. They buried him with incense. She got tossed in a ditch. You ask if the graveyard is for women like her. She nods. They didn't get funerals, not real ones, but I give them what I can. Sometimes I sing, sometimes I just sit here and make sure the birds don't forget them. And here's your historical fact. In Byzantine society, burial rites were deeply sacred, essential for the soul's journey. But sex workers, criminal, heretics, and those who died outside the church's good graces were often denied proper burial. Many were interred in unmarked graves or communal pits. A few were secretly buried by family or sympathetic clergy, but most vanished into the soil without a trace. You watch her toss another handful of crumbs. The pigeons barely flinch. She points to one grave in particular marked with a crude carving of a lily. That one was called Merope. She used to sing in the baths, had a voice like smoke. Clients paid just to listen to her hum. You ask what happened. She got pregnant, tried to keep the baby. Her owner didn't like that, neither did the client. They left her bleeding for 2 days before she died. You sit with that for a moment. Then you ask why Diane comes here, day after day. Because someone should, she says. Because someone needs to say their names, even if I'm the only one who remembers them. And here's your fringe fact. In some marginalised communities of the empire, especially among former sex workers or widows, informal rituals developed. Private ceremonies to mourn those the church refused. These often involved singing, offerings of food or flowers, and whispered prayers that combined Christian and folk traditions. Unofficial saints, some called them. Not blessed by Rome or Constantinople, but beatified by memory. Diane pulls a small wooden charm from her shawl, a carved figure of a woman with no face. She presses it into your palm. She doesn't have a name, she says, so you can give her one. You ask what she means. She's for remembering, for all the ones no one else will. You hold the charm for a long time, longer than you mean to. The grain is worn smooth by handling, the edges softened by time. You ask Diane if she thinks the Empire will ever change. She laughs gently. No, but the stories can be. There's... As you leave the graveyard, the clouds begin to part, pour just enough to let a beam of sunlight fall across one of the stones. You don't know the name, maybe no one ever did, but you pause just for a moment, and whisper something anyway. Later, back in the city, you pass a child drawing figures in the dirt. Tiny people with big eyes and tangled hair. One of them has a sword, another has wings. The child tells you it's a picture of her mother. She's gone, she says, but she visits sometimes, in the wind. And here's your scholarly debate. Did the marginal burials of sex workers reflect society's true moral core? Or were they just another tool of control? A punishment that outlived the punished? Some argued it was theology in action, a way to enforce divine order. Others suggest it was fear, plain and simple, that the church feared women who made their own lives and punished them, even in death, for doing so. You carry Diane's faceless charm with you as the sun dips low. The streets turn gold and then grey. Another day is ending. Somewhere another girl is being forgotten. But not by you. The city is quiet now, or as close to quiet as Constantinople ever gets. Somewhere in the distance a dog barks once, then again. You hear the slow churn of the sea slapping against the docks and the faint creak of wood from a ship rocking gently in its berth. Lamps flicker low in upper windows. A scent of smoke clings to the stone. You walk one last time through the Mise, that great artery of the city now emptied of its usual chaos. No chariots, no vendors, just the soft slap of your footsteps and the ghosts clinging to every shadow. You've seen too much, not in the way that scars exactly, though some of the images will stay with you longer than you'd like, but in the way that alters, that shifts the shape of what you thought history looked like. You came chasing a dark truth. You found 30 more. You found girls who disappeared between the cracks of law and scripture. You found old women keeping the names of the forgotten alive by feeding birds in back alley cemeteries. You found brothels hiding behind prayer and pleasure hiding behind punishment. You found power where it wasn't supposed to be, and cruelty where it was called virtue. And you found resistance, not the grand kind with swords and banners, but the small, stubborn kind. A girl holding onto a name. A worker carving ships out of scrapwood. A priest who knows and chooses silence because the truth is heavier than anyone wants to carry. You think of the voices you heard along the way. Azaneth's quiet command, Narcia's smoky defiance, Cassian's cold fire, Dion's gentle remembering. None of them begged for your sympathy. They didn't need it. They only asked to be seen, heard, remembered in the spaces history left blank. You hold the faceless charm Diane gave you. It's warm now. From your hand, from the day spent walking, from the weight of everything it stands for. You whisper a name into it. Not your own, not even one of theirs. Just a name for all of them. The girls who didn't get burials. The women rewritten as margins, the lives measured in coin and curses. You say it softly, once. Then let it settle into the stillness. The rain returns, but only a mist this time. Enough to soften the dust. You let it fall on your skin without flinching. It feels like permission. And you realise maybe the Empire never meant to remember them, but you will. So now, turn off the light, let the silence come, let it be full, not empty. You've done your part, you saw them, you listened, and now you let them rest.